Good evening. Welcome to Times Square in the heart of New York, our home for history in the making. There's never been a US presidential campaign quite like it. Long, bitter, divisive, full of vitriol, even hatred, sometimes vicious, always tumultuous and unpredictable. A titanic struggle which will finally be resolved tonight for the most glittering prize in American politics. The two people who would be president even managed to up the pace and the rhetoric in the last day, campaigning into the wee small hours of Tuesday morning. Hillary Clinton started her final swing in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and returned to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania last night, underlying just how key that northeastern state is to her hopes of winning the White House. In between, she visited Michigan, another Rust Belt state she wanted to shore up, and finished with a midnight rally in Raleigh, North Carolina, a toss-up state she's fought hard to win. Tonight, she's here in Manhattan and will soon be heading for a huge rally at the Javits Convention Center on 34th Street. It's just a few blocks away from us on New York's West Side. Donald Trump started his day early in Florida, that swing state of swing states, and one he has to win to secure the White House. He then took to Michigan and Pennsylvania, Democratic states he thinks his appeal to blue-collar workers can turn Republican. Then North Carolina, of course, and finishing late last night in New Hampshire, the only New England state he has hopes of winning. Now he's here in Manhattan too, just a few blocks up the road at his campaign headquarters in the massive New York Hilton. In recent weeks, Americans turned out in unprecedented numbers to vote early in this election, but that was as nothing compared with the tens of millions more who started queuing from before dawn this morning to cast their votes across this huge nation in an election which will have profound consequences for them and the rest of us. Now, throughout our extensive coverage of the results, we'll be joined by a distinguished panel of experts who will help us analyse the results as they come in. We'll introduce them as we go along. But first, the word goes to my co-presenter tonight, World News America's Katty Kay. Katty, you've covered 4 presidential elections. You've been everywhere in this endless campaign. What are your thoughts tonight?
I've never seen a campaign like this one, as you suggested, long and bitter, with two candidates who are deeply unpopular and have almost Shakespearean character flaws. But almost more than Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump themselves, it's what this campaign has shown me about the state of this country. America is a country that is changing at lightning speed. It's changing economically, it's changing culturally, and it's changing demographically. And perhaps that's the most important. The backdrop to this saga, this drama of the American presidential election, is that the United States is on the doorstep of becoming a majority non-white country. And in these changes, Andrew, some people are winning, but others are losing. And they are the people that have been drawn to Donald Trump. Now, I should say, as I've travelled around during the course of this campaign, overwhelmingly, the supporters of Donald Trump that I have met have been decent, hard-working, thoughtful Americans who have often said to me they don't like what he says about immigrants and about women and about Muslims. But they're so desperate that they're going to take a roll of the dice, and they're taking that roll of the dice tonight. We will see if their candidate wins, or after having sent 44 men to the top job, America elects finally a woman as its president. The stakes either way are enormous. Enormous. I haven't seen anything like it.
Enormous, you're correct. Well, many of these themes Katty was talking about there, we will come back to as the results start coming in. The first states close their polls in just over 35 minutes' time. So let's go now to the Clinton headquarters, where the BBC's John Sopel is there. John, tell us the mood at Clinton HQ.
Well, the mood, I think, has changed quite palpably over the past 2 or 3 days. 3 days ago, sort of tetchy, tense. They hadn't had the latest letter from the FBI. Then they got the letter from the FBI saying no further action would be taken. That seemed to coincide with polls showing a slight widening of the Clinton lead, and whether that was in nationwide polls or battleground polls or tracker polls, it all seemed to point in one direction, not uniquely, but generally speaking, a slight Clinton lead. Today, I think that any sense of confidence they had is replaced by that sheer nervous anxiety on the day of an election. Are you getting out the vote? Is every car going to pick up every pensioner and every disabled person that needs it? Have you got all your kind of block captains going down every particular block and making sure that the people who said they would vote have voted? I think the other thing to pick up where Catty left off, which is on the kind of changing demographic of the country, where Donald Trump made a big play about talking about how he was going to almost rewrite the electoral map of America, bring people back into the political process who it seemed had got lost. Well, a waking giant has awoken, and it seems to be the Latino community who do seem to have come out in record numbers in early voting states. And it's worth saying, Andrew, that probably a third of Americans had already voted who were going to vote before today's polling stations open. So that is where the Clinton camp have cause for optimism. But I think that at this stage, it's getting out the vote, it's checking everything down to the last detail that you're doing all that you can do.
OK, John's going to be with us all night at the Clinton campaign headquarters. Laura Trevelyan is just a couple of blocks from where we are in the Hilton Hotel with the Trump headquarters. John there describing a mood of cautious optimism in the Clinton campaign, Laura. So what's the mood there at the Trump headquarters?
Well, Catty, I should say that the media are currently outnumbering Trump supporters. They're beginning to trickle in, just a handful are here right now. And people are enthused by what they see as a big turnout across the country. Remember, Catty, the hopes of the Trump campaign resting on bringing back those missing white voters, people who are registered to vote but just haven't turned out for whatever reason. And Trump desperately hoping that he can take those states in the upper Midwest, like Michigan, like Wisconsin, that these states will come home, that late-breaking undecided voters will break to him. But we're also seeing signs tonight, Catty, of some unhappiness in the Republican campaign. We've just heard the Republican campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway. She's been complaining on television about the lack of support from the Republican infrastructure for Donald Trump. A tacit acknowledgement there that Hillary Clinton, Republicans feel, had a better Democratic get-out-the-vote machine. Now, Donald Trump himself, he's not here. He's just a few blocks away at Trump Tower, where he's watching the results on television. He tweeted, but he was asked today in an interview, would he accept the result? And he said, well, I have to look at what's happening. And he said that there have been reports of voting irregularities, that when people vote for Republicans, the entire ticket turns over to Democrats. So he's obviously reserving the right there, Catty, to challenge a result if it doesn't go the way that he wants.
Thanks, Laura. Laura, at the Trump headquarters there at the New York Hilton, right in the center of Manhattan. And in just over half an hour, some of the states on the East Coast here of America will begin to close. The speculation will end. The results will start to come in. And when that happens, there's a magic number we need to keep in mind tonight. That number is 270. Because you don't become president of the United States by winning the most votes across America. That would be too simple. After all, Al Gore got more votes than George Bush in 2000, but Mr. Bush got the White House. No, you become president by winning 270 votes in something called the Electoral College. Confused? Don't be. Here's Jeremy Vine to explain how it works.
I will try. I've actually just had a tweet, Andrew, from somebody who said, can you just run the Electoral College past me one more time? No problem at all. We can explain it as many times as you want. Here's the map of the USA in our virtual graphics center here. 50 states. There are 538 Electoral College votes. And as Andrew says, you've got to win 270 or more to become president. So you need a majority of them. Now, the way it works is this. It'll be helpful, actually, if I show you the result of the last election in 2012, when Mitt Romney, the Republican, whose colour is red, of course, was beaten in his second election by Barack Obama, whose colour is blue, the Democrat. So each state has a certain fixed number of electoral college votes. State like Montana up here with not very many people only has 3. California over here has a huge number, 55. Well, there are 38 million people living there. You win by winning the states. When you win in a state on the votes, you get all the electoral college votes from that state with only 2 technical exceptions, Maine and Nebraska. Let's park those for now, though. So you win in the state and you get all the electoral college votes from that state. And what's really interesting about the system is that last time, actually, Mitt Romney was not that far behind Barack Obama in terms of the actual weight of the votes across the nation. Obama got 51%. But have a look at the actual result. In the Electoral College, there we go, 332 to 206. He was basically 60-40 was his advantage in the Electoral College because he piled his votes up in areas where there were the most precious Electoral College votes, in areas of the greatest populations. If we have a look here at the state list, we'll see the states with the highest number of Electoral College votes. So we're flashing them on the floor for you here. So you've got, for example, classically, California, I mentioned, with 55. Texas, reliably Republican, 38. And down the list we go, Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and so on. But actually, in a funny sort of way, that's not our focus through the night. Because some of these states, California, for example, are almost sewn up before the elections even started. It would be unthinkable for California to go anything but Democrat. So let me change these flashing states for you and change them to the most tightly contested states. And this is where the heat of battle really is. So now you see the Electoral College votes assigned to the states that are most in play in this election. First thing you notice is most are blue. That's because we've colored them in with the color of the party that won them last time. So Trump needs to win, well, at least half of them. Colorado, 9, Florida, 29, Iowa, 6, Michigan, 16, then Ohio and Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, you can see there with 10 Electoral College votes. Awful lot of them here, actually in the Midwest, the Great Lakes region, places that are, some of them, predominantly white. That should help Trump. A lot of people hurting still because of the 2000s recession. Different story as you go down the East Coast there. Places like North Carolina and Virginia, where I'm standing, have increasing ethnic minority populations, lots more college graduates who are working, younger workers. Their character is changing. As Katy was saying, this is partly an election which is describing a new America to us. Here's Florida, 29 Electoral College votes. Pivotal in 2000, wasn't it, when George Bush Jr. won the presidency. Squeaked it in Florida by 500 votes. Florida changing too. Its white population only just above 50% now. So these are where the battles will be fought tonight. We'll be watching so carefully in the Midwest, down on the East Coast, here in the West as well, to see whether those blue states are turning red. And they will need to for Trump to emerge as the victor by the end of the night.
Jeremy, thanks for that. So, how will we know who has won each state as the polls close? Well, our American sister network, ABC News, is just across Times Square from us tonight, and we have a BBC team embedded in their results room. And as each state closes its polls, they'll look at the exit polls and the early declared results. There you can see the ABC studio. That's where they'll be doing their election coverage from. That's where our BBC embeds are. This is in Times Square in Manhattan. It's the city to be in tonight for these results. Hillary Clinton's here. Donald Trump is here. The American networks are here.
Andrew Neil is here.
Andrew and Katy Kay is here. So it's only right that the BBC should be here as well. Now, when they're sure at ABC News that there's a clear result in each of the states, they'll predict the winner. And we'll bring that to you. It's what's called projecting a state. Norm Ornstein is a veteran of those nights. Norm, projections, they're what matter here. Did you ever actually get around to counting the votes?
We see the votes counted, but you know, we have very sophisticated models that the networks have done. Sometimes they've been wrong, and sometimes they've jumped the gun. We're not going to see that anymore. They look at votes by county and by critical areas from the past. They look at the numbers of votes coming in. They're able to use the exit polls as a little bit of a check. And generally speaking, they can get a pretty good handle on it. But we're not going to see results given until they're pretty sure. And if we get results very soon after a poll closes, we're going to have a pretty good idea, and that's where we're going to be looking, for example, early on, Andrew, at Florida, where the polls close at 8. If we get a result soon thereafter, that'll tell us a lot about this election.
Okay, Andrew, we're going to bring you, of course, the results and all the analysis from both left and right, Democrat, Republican, during the course of the evening. We're also going to bring you bits of news as it comes in. And a spokesman for former President George W. Bush has confirmed that he and his wife have voted today, but they didn't vote for Donald Trump and they didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. That gives you the backdrop to this election. How extraordinary is that? That the last Republican president did not vote for the Republican candidate for the presidency today.
Wow.
That's big.
It's unprecedented.
Unprecedented.
So just to reiterate what Norm Ornstein was saying there, when we say to you it's too early to call a state, for example, Florida, which all eyes are on, that doesn't mean that it's really close, that it's like 51-49 and we don't yet know. It could be much broader than that, but we need to be sure before we can call it. And that's why we will wait until the exit poll and the early precincts mesh up and make sure that we are that we know which way that state's going. Let's speak now to the first of our two distinguished guests tonight. Michelle Bernard is an independent political strategist, but she voted for Hillary Clinton, has supported her, and Joe Borelli is a Trump campaigner. Welcome to you both. Michelle, you first. Why has this been such a difficult election for Hillary Clinton?
The amount of animosity against Hillary Clinton as a person is really, it's a phenomenon that we are just not accustomed to seeing. It is unexplainable. There is backlash against Hillary Clinton from people who dislike her husband, from women.
But he was a popular president.
Well, he was a popular president, but there are, for example, in the African-American community, there is a lot of anger, for example, over Bill Clinton's crime bill that he passed, and a lot of belief that we have seen a large number of African-American men incarcerated as a result of that crime bill. Language that Hillary Clinton used in the past referring to African-American men as super predators. There are people of a certain age group who just believe that a woman should not be president.
But that maybe explain why there's a big chunk of the African-American community doesn't like her, though you and I both know they are going to vote for her overwhelmingly.
Yes.
But the dislike of Hillary Clinton is far broader than that. If it was just for these reasons, she wouldn't be struggling so much during this campaign.
No.
Why is the broader dislike?
Well, the broader dislike falls into so many categories, but I think the largest amount of dislike that we see for Hillary Clinton is the fact that people still expect women in politics to behave a certain way. And there is a sort of coarseness to Hillary Clinton where people are always feeling that they want to see through the veil, feel who she is more importantly. You remember in 2008, there was an instance when she cried, I believe, in New Hampshire, and her popularity ratings escalated at that time. We are still grappling with how Americans view women at the highest echelons of power.
Well, Joe, let me put that same question that Andrew put to Michelle in a sense to you, because I've covered, 8 political conventions in this country. I was there in Cleveland for the Republican convention. I've never been to a convention where the hatred of the opposing candidate was so visceral. Why do you think Republicans and Trump supporters hate Hillary Clinton so much?
I would venture to say it's even beyond Republicans and Trump supporters. I think a big chunk of the population is pretty unhappy with Hillary Clinton. And it's not, I think, as you pointed out, just because she's a woman. In fact, I don't think it's at all because she's a woman. Remember, the Republican Party had Sarah Palin run as their vice presidential nominee 8 years ago. It's because the Clintons themselves have walked this narrow line between ethics and scandals for the better part of 40 years. People have been ingrained with this history of this particular couple, whether it's the foundation or Benghazi. The list goes on in perpetuity. I think a lot of the American public is just fed up with these sort of the quintessential insiders of all insiders in a year that's been framed as the insiders versus the outsiders.
Well, let's say all that's true, just for the sake of this argument for the moment. Would it not have made more sense for Mr. Trump then to try to broaden his appeal? If he was up against such an unpopular candidate, even unpopular with the Democratic base, would it not have made more sense to broaden his appeal and not make himself an enemy of Hispanics, not make himself an enemy of the black vote in this country, not make himself an enemy of women, and really reduce his core constituency to white blue-collar workers.
I think that's a fundamental mistake of the campaign, and we'll see within the next 2 hours whether or not he gained the support of enough Hispanics to even narrow the gap between the Romney numbers to the Bush numbers.
He won't get what Mr. Bush got.
He certainly won't get,
but he'd be lucky to get what Mr. Romney got.
He would be. If he gets what Mr. Romney got, I think he'll win the election. But you're right. I mean, he did. It's one thing to say there's an issue with immigration in this country, and this is certainly not the only country in the world that's having this debate about immigration right now. It's another thing to kind of phrase it in the ways he did, and it probably only served to alienate a chunk of Hispanics. I mean, obviously it did. We could see that from the exit polling.
Let's flip it. I've been to Trump rallies. Clearly, there are an awful lot of people who turn up at that rallies who feel that Mr. Trump can give them a better deal in the country. What is it, do you think, that he's tapped into? What is it that he's offering those voters in tangible terms that will make them feel that their life is going to get better if we have a President Trump?
The message has been great from the beginning. I mean, it's kind of the simple "Make America Great Again," but it sort of appeals to the heart of a disenfranchised electorate that feels that there is sort of two sets of rules. There's a rule that the Washington elites play. There's a rule that these big corporations play. There's a rule that global trade and global elitism played, and they feel left out. If you're someone from Peoria or anywhere in between in the Midwest, you feel fundamentally left out of the election process. And it's amazing, to be honest, it's amazing that someone who's a billionaire and who's as bombastic and as as gold-plated as Donald Trump could probably talk to middle-class, working-class Americans better than people whose job it was as politicians to communicate with them.
All right. You mentioned Peoria. Nixon used to say, "Keep your eye on Peoria." Peoria, Illinois. The way Peoria goes is the way America goes, a quintessential middle American town. And of course, there's lots of towns like that in Ohio, too, another Rust Belt state, one of the swing states, one of the states Mr. Trump has to win tonight to keep his chances of getting into the White House alive. Our correspondent, Barbara Plett-Usher, is in Cleveland, Ohio. Barbara, the Ohio's had quite a lot of attention in this campaign, and I guess we're all going to be watching what happens there this evening.
Yes, it's interesting, Ohio, because it has pockets of strong traditional Democratic support and pockets of strong traditional Republican support, which of course is why it's a swing state. It also has this reputation for voting for the man or woman, perhaps, who wins. Since 1964, it's picked the president. So there's a lot of attention here. The Trump campaign is feeling quite bullish because he has been consistently ahead in the polls throughout the last couple of weeks of the campaign. They feel that he is going to be able to pick up quite a lot of those angry white working class votes. A lot of those white working class people are in the Democratic camp, the blue collar Democrats, and they feel that they might be able to win those over and tip the scales in that way. The Democrats would say, well, the unions who have traditionally backed them are still backing Mrs. Clinton. That is true, but there is uneasiness amongst the union membership. So it's not clear that the unions will be able to deliver all their members. Having said that, Mr. Trump has had a very antagonistic relationship with the Republican elite and leadership in this state, the state Republican committee, the governor, even the man running for the senator who is a Republican. So there is this division between his campaign and traditional Republicans. There are also quite a few Republicans who've benefited from President Obama's economy, technologically, from globalization. Will they support Mrs. Clinton? Will they go that far? She's hoping they will, but they may not. So there's quite a lot at play here. And as you said, Mr. Trump has to win this state. And of the swing states that he has to win, he seems to be doing the best in polling here. So his campaign is really hoping that that pays off for them.
Okay, Barbara Plett-Usher there in Cleveland, Ohio for us. One of the most interesting visits I made during the course of this campaign, Andrew, actually was up to the Cleveland area, to the old steel area of Ohio. And I met there a steel worker who had voted Democrat his whole life, a union member who changed party registration this year to vote for Donald Trump. And for me, that was so telling about the way this campaign is going and about the state of the country.
And so these, what we rather disparagingly, I think, called the Rust Belt states around the Great Lakes and in the Midwest, traditional Democratic territory, really highly unionized, lots of blue-collar workers. Donald Trump's appeal to them has brought them into contention.
Andrew, let me just a few things from the exit polls that elaborate on these things. We have Latino Decisions, which focuses on Latino voters, did its own in-depth exit poll of Latinos. 18% for Trump, a new low by quite a lot. White.
Some might be surprised it's that high.
The broader national exit polls, white educated women are going for Clinton, which is a dramatic break from the past. And a poll from Wisconsin, which is particularly interesting, which is an even more dramatic education break. The educated voters in Wisconsin are going for Clinton by a larger margin than they've ever seen for a Democrat. The less than college educated voters going for Trump by a larger margin than we've seen. We've got different divisions in this election and different numbers. And one final, it looks like we're going to see 70% of the electorate this time will be white. That's down 2% from the last time. Inexorably, we're seeing that mix change. And getting back to what Joe said, it may prove to be a really big mistake for Trump to have moved away from some of those groups of voters that are growing and focused on those that are not.
It was something, of course, Republicans wanted to do, be more inclusive. It hasn't happened this time around. Women voters critical. Of course, this is the election that might put the first woman into the White House. Rajini Vaidyanathan's down in Miami, Florida for us, another key state that we're going to be watching during the course of this evening. And you've been have with you to speak to women voters down there, Rajini.
Yes, well, I've spent quite a bit of time in Florida throughout this campaign, as indeed have both of the candidates. For me, on my travels, I found pretty much a straight split down the middle between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And certainly that is something that is reflected in the opinion polls here. And so for both the Clinton campaign and the Trump campaign, it's been all about getting the base out, all about driving turnout. Now, to discuss this, I'm joined by BBC Mundo's Liliette Heredero and Anne Henderson from the Nonpartisan Women's Fund. Thanks very much for joining us. Liliette, let's start with you. There has been early voting here in Florida, more than 6 million ballots cast. And when we look at those, there's been a record turnout amongst the Hispanic population. What do you think's driven this?
I think Donald Trump has been driving this. I mean, the fact that Donald Trump started his campaign referring to Mexicans as rapists and murderers has put the focus on this anti-immigration rhetoric. So many Latinos feel fear in this campaign. You know, if Trump wins, will he build a wall as he has promised? So will he deport 11 million undocumented immigrants? So Latinos do feel that this time around their vote matters. And I think that's why we've been seeing the large numbers in early voting and also today in the polls here in Florida.
Let's bring you in, and your role in this election has been trying to drive turnout amongst women in certain communities. What have you seen in terms of turnout? Because Donald Trump does have huge support here as well, even if it's not in large numbers of the Hispanic community.
In Florida, registered women voters outnumber male registered voters in every demographic, in every age group, and in both parties. Therefore, if turnout is really the question tonight, it will be women who make the difference. Our organization, which is nonpartisan, started 6 months ago to canvass and educate women about the two issues that would really make a difference in their life: equal pay for equal work and sexual harassment. We have found great enthusiasm, especially among low-income women who live in some of our poorest 4 neighborhoods in Miami, and it's surprising.
And what do you think is driving this turnout on previous elections?
I think it's a woman candidate.
That doesn't necessarily mean, Liliette, that Hillary Clinton's going to take this state. I've certainly travelled to parts of the state where Donald Trump has huge support, including amongst women. But there is another factor in Florida, which we've both seen in our reporting, and that's people who dislike both of the candidates and might not turn out.
I think even with Hispanics, I mean, yes, we tend to say that Hispanics tend to vote for the Democrats. Now, I've come across and I've interviewed many Hispanics that also don't like Hillary Clinton and also distrust Hillary Clinton. I think there are several reasons for that. They tend to see Hillary as part of the political elite. And also Hispanics in particular tend to say that, look, Hillary is just going to carry on with Obama's legacy. And, for example, Obama promised an immigration reform and didn't deliver. And that's a big deal for Hispanics. So there's also that mistrust between both candidates for Hispanics and in Florida in general.
And Anne, let's just bring you in. I saw in Tampa at the weekend huge lines of African American voters trying to get to cast their ballots before early voting closed. What impact do you think early voting will have here in Florida? Because from what I've been reading, this state's had the highest number of early votes than any other state.
Yes, almost 40% of our state voted in an extended voting period. We put money into those voting systems and improved it. And we have a legacy here of having to work hard to vote. This time, that wasn't the case.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us, Anne Henderson and Liliette Heredero. Well, as I said just then, it all boils down to turnout. And of course, some of the voters, like the ones I met in Swing, Hillsborough County, which is where Tampa is, those voters who said they'll make their minds up when they get into the ballot box.
Regina, thank you for that. We're getting reports coming in that 2 polling stations in California have had to close because 4 people were taken to hospital following a shooting incident there in the West 4th Street and Orange Avenue in Azusa. We're getting reports there from the Los Angeles Times and others. We don't know what the condition of the people are yet. In fact, we don't know very much at all. It's just coming in. We'll bring that to you more as we get it. Now, throughout this campaign, we have heard that Hillary Clinton is the most unpopular presidential candidate to run ever since polling began in the early 1940s. The most unpopular, except for Donald Trump, who is actually the most unpopular, according to polling. So what do Americans really make of both of these presidential candidates? Let's go back to Jeremy Vine.
Andrew, it comes down to, I think the word we will use is favourability. So when you poll people and you say, do you feel favourable to this person or unfavourable? And then you put the pluses and the minuses together, you get a score, favourability score. And we're going to take a look back at political history now, back to the 50s, and just have a look at the kind of favourability figures that were being scored by candidates, say, in the mid-50s. So we have here Adlai Stevenson against Eisenhower, 1956, and you can see, okay, Stevenson lost, but pretty good favourability rating, 30% in credit with the voters, even though he lost. Ike's off the scale there, 72%. Let's just go through the graph here and have a look at some more. It's quite a standout figure for here. Poor old Barry Goldwater, down on minus 4%. Lyndon Johnson, the winner, of course, after Kennedy's assassination by a big margin. Interesting little history point that actually Hillary Clinton worked on that campaign incredibly, in the Goldwater campaign. So presumably learned a lot from that. But as we go through the graph, what you see is gradually a whittling away of these favourability ratings. So by the mid-70s, they're still pretty high. Here we've got Carter and Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford lost in 76. They're still pretty high. Even the losing candidate gets quite a high favourability score. And then watch what happens in the modern era of politics. So we've gone through here Watergate, haven't we? And I guess we've gone into a situation all over Western democracies where political leaders are getting more and more of a focus on themselves. The searchlight is very, very bright indeed. And by the time we get to Bush against John Kerry, look at this, 17%, 22%. And actually still very, very low when you see the last presidential election in 2012 of Obama against Romney. But let me show you something that's really striking now, which is when we come to the end of the graph. So you can see here this whittling away of favourability. Politicians just generally held in lower esteem. Even Obama, with all the hopes and so on that came in behind him, still not breaking clear of that. Have a look at the end of the graph here. Look at these 2 candidates now, just as you've been saying. So they're minus 11 and minus 28. Exactly as Andrew said, that yes, Hillary Clinton is the lowest there's ever been, lower than Barry Goldwater, but my goodness, Trump is twice as low in terms of favourability. And that is so stark. Yes, it might partly be about the modern age. It might be the post-Watergate era. Maybe it's something to do with the Clinton White House in the USA. But it's still just exceptional, isn't it, to see it that low? And it explains why there's so much just a sense of real misery around the election and the sense that the candidates maybe could be better and so many voters disillusioned with the whole thing. Now let's ask some questions, some individual questions of these candidates. So you're asking a question of voters here. Are they qualified to serve as president? This is material we're getting from exit polls taken today. So this is exit poll material that's really very fresh for you. 53% saying yes, Clinton is qualified, 37% for Donald Trump. So Trump lower than Clinton here. Now let's put another question to the voters in our exit poll. Personality and temperament. Again, Clinton wins on this by quite a margin, more than 20%, 56 to 34 for Trump. So she's ahead on that as well. Now this one we have to look quite carefully at. Not honest and trustworthy. You don't want to have 65%. You want your score to be low in this one. Trump is, again, losing in this category as well. More voters thinking of him as not honest and trustworthy. These are poor scores for them both. One more is striking because it's the one Trump wins on by quite a margin. Have a look at this. Who could bring change? And look at that. Trump, 82% of people saying yes, he can bring change. And that must surely include a lot of people who disagree with him and are not voting for him, think he's going to bring change, and people not really believing that Hillary Clinton can. So if there's a change candidate, peculiarly, that's of course the message that Barack Obama ran on in 2012, it seems to be resonating with people either voting for or against Trump. Reading between the lines of this one, goodness only knows. But there are some categories anyway where he is stronger than Clinton. The overall message here, Andrew, is that the favorability of politicians is really low now, and in this race, exceptionally so.
Work with the guys in
Jeremy, thanks for that. It's only 5 minutes to go, and some of the first states will close, and we may be able to project some results for you at the top of the hour, 7 o'clock here, East Coast time. Before we do that, go to Anita Dunn, former Obama White House Communications Director. She's in our DC bureau. Anita Dunn, in so many areas, Mrs. Clinton has been ahead of Donald Trump in terms of experience, of character, and so on. So why has this campaign been such a struggle for her?
Well, there are a couple of things that have been true throughout this campaign. One is that the majority of people in the United States in polling feel that the country is headed in the wrong direction. And this is a general sense of unease that has really been here since the financial meltdown of 2008. So that is what we like to think of as a change electorate. When you have 2/3 of the people in this country feeling that the country's in a wrong direction, there's a strong pull for change. Now, as Jeremy was saying, Donald Trump is seen as the candidate of change. But given the fact that he is viewed as unqualified, that his temperament concerns people, that he doesn't have the experience people believe, it shows you there's a fine line between being a change candidate and being a risky candidate. And what Donald Trump has become for, I think, a majority of voters in this country is too big a risk to try and go for change. But it is also true that in this country, it's very hard for a political party that has held the White House for 8 years to win that next term. Since World War II, it's only happened once, and that was with George Bush following Ronald Reagan in 1988. It's just very difficult. And so I think that Hillary Clinton has been fighting uphill in many respects for the entire campaign, but that she has always been seen as experienced, qualified, and prepared to be president.
Anita, it's Katty Kay here. The two issues on which Hillary Clinton does not rank higher than Donald Trump are improving the American economy and defending the country against terrorism. The problem for her is that those are Americans' two top issues when it comes to what they're concerned about in this election campaign. How is she going to overcome that gap, even if she does win?
One of the things that's always been true about Hillary Clinton is that she is a better person in government than she is as a candidate. I think that was true when she was a U.S. Senator and was really able to work with people in both political parties and was a very effective senator by all counts and was reelected by an overwhelming margin when she ran for reelection. She was a polarizing figure during the presidential campaign in 1992 when her husband, Bill Clinton, ran. Once she became First Lady, again, she was able to build effective coalitions. A lot of this is what do you do once you get into office, and how do you show people, not just tell people, that you're going to be a strong president who can protect this country from terrorism and that you have ideas to rebuild the economy. I think Hillary Clinton fully understands those are the two issues facing this country, and should she win the presidency tonight, that they will be her major priorities. And at the end of the day, once you're in office,
we're going to leave it there. Sorry, Anita Dunn. I have to hurry you up there. Thank you for joining us from our DC bureau. I cut in there because we are less than 2 minutes away from polling closing in 6 states. And we're joined by Emily Maitlis. She was on another BBC programme earlier this evening in the BBC studios in downtown New York. She's had to run across Manhattan because the traffic is so bad to make it here in time. And you have.
Bit of a scout's pace. I've just got to find my voice now, Andrew. Yes, this is a critical moment because in the next couple of moments, we're having the first polls closing in several key states. This is how the map looks like now. Right, blank, and a clean sheet to start with. But this is where we're going to see the polls closing. And the most interesting ones, the most marginal ones, those fierce battlegrounds are the ones we put at the top. Virginia, then. Let's start with that one. And this is a very tight race. You can see from its electoral history, it's been taken twice by Bush, twice by Obama. Tim Kaine, the senator here, Clinton's running mate, has been campaigning in fluent Spanish, probably trying to attract that Hispanic vote we've been hearing about so much in the changing demographic areas of North Virginia. You can see how the campaign polls have Clinton on 47, Trump on 42%. This is just a campaign poll. This is how we went into it. They haven't given us any real results here yet. Let me just take you on to another one now, if I can. Georgia, we're watching very closely before, which seems odd when you look at that electoral history. It's had 5 solid runs of Republicans. The last Democrat to win here was Bill Clinton in 1992. And this is putting Trump ahead on 48% of the vote, Clinton on 44%. Again, we're talking about campaign polls. If either Virginia or Georgia has been called, then gets called early, then it will be a big moment. Indiana is our first result of the night. It has been called projected for Trump. That is the language they use here. It's been projected for Trump, but they wouldn't be telling us this unless they were fairly certain. The polls here have closed for statewide at 7 o'clock, but some of them started closing at 6 o'clock. That's why the counting's already been underway for an hour. I'm just going to scoot through. You have to come with me and see if we've had anything else. South Carolina, we should expect to get pretty quickly as well. It's voted Republican 9 times in a row. The last Democrat to win here was Carter in '76. And let me just scoot through to the other ones. Kentucky, also been projected for Trump, a 65% share of the vote to 31%. This is not an unexpected result. If Trump wasn't winning Kentucky for the Republicans, it would have been an upset indeed. The last Democrat to win here, once again, was Clinton, governor of Arkansas. Kentucky, a neighbouring southern state, probably gave him a help here. But this one, very much in the Republican, Trump deep south states these, so no big surprises. Virginia, we're coming back to, just to say it's too early to project. Now, that's in itself interesting. It means it's probably quite a tight race. This was never called last time round. It was never called. And if it's called quickly, then that tells us an awful lot. So this is how the map is colouring up so far. We've had the first 3 states called. Clinton on 3, that's the state of Vermont. Bernie Sanders, her rival in the Democratic nomination, is the senator there, but it's a clear Democrat win for her, landing her 3. Trump is on 19 with Indiana and Kentucky. Both of those started counting about an hour ago, so no big surprises here. If Trump starts to take the lead early on, do not be surprised. It's more a reflection of the kind of states in this part of America, the Deep South, the South, that are closing earlier. Clinton on 3, Trump on 19. What does this tell us? We have a long way to go yet.
Get the coffee on.
Yeah, and catch your breath, Emily, there. Thank you for that. Now, Catty, the states that have closed are Georgia. We don't know, that's an interesting one. Indiana for Mr. Trump. Kentucky for Mr. Trump. South Carolina, I'm not sure we've heard you, but almost certainly will be for Mr. Trump. Vermont for Mrs. Clinton. Virginia, of course, is the toss-up. He had to win Indiana and Kentucky. There's no surprise there. These are Republican states.
No, he has to win Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina. Otherwise, something very peculiar has happened during the course of this election campaign. Virginia is the one we're all going to be watching. It would be a big take, an important take for Hillary Clinton. It's one of those states we've been talking during the course of the evening that has been changing demographically. It's very close to where I live, a mile or so away from where I live. And it's an area of Virginia in the north where you've had a younger voter, millennials coming in, a lot of women living in those suburbs, a lot of Hispanics. And then you have down in the southeast of the state, military bases, and in the southwest of the states, energy areas of the country, much more Trump land down there. So Virginia's going to tell us a lot about how other states are going to go as well. Georgia I'm going to watch too, because there's been speculation, it's unlikely, but if Hillary Clinton were to take Georgia tonight, we're looking at a very different kind of election day.
Bishop, Mrs. Clinton must think she's won Virginia because she hasn't been there, I think, since July and hasn't spent much money on TV ads. So she must think it's in the bag. And it will be a real shock to her if it's not.
It would be. I think it would be a real shock to most people if she does not win Virginia. The largest shock was when Virginia went for Barack Obama in 2008. The state has changed, as Katy was saying, so much. We see so many people with a lot of professional degrees, a lot of women in the area, and very changing attitudes about what the country should look like and about the role of women. And I feel fairly confident that Virginia is going to go for Hillary Clinton
Well,
this
we
evening.
shall see. It could be a long while before we know. Joe Borelli, are you worried that the Republicans, for almost 2 generations now, have been able to count on the South? Unless it was a Southern governor like Bill Clinton or Jimmy Carter running for president, and they did pick up Southern states, they were pretty much in the Republican column. But now we begin to see at least question marks. I put it no higher than that over Virginia, over Georgia, over North Carolina too. Are you worried the Republicans are losing their grip on the South because they're not going with the changing demographic that Katy has been talking about?
Well, as Katy mentioned, Virginia is becoming more northern, for lack of a better word, and it's not part of this traditional Democratic stronghold South anymore. And in fact, the Trump campaign essentially pulled out of Virginia a number of weeks ago when they realized that the state might be too far gone. The 2 states to watch in this particular set of states, though, is certainly Georgia or Virginia. If Hillary Clinton doesn't win Virginia and Donald Trump does not win Georgia, it will be a groundbreaking landslide in one direction or the other, I think.
Can I take a quick trip down memory lane here?
Why not?
Date myself ferociously. I remember in 2004, in that election, sitting on a roof overlooking the White House. It was absolutely freezing. And somebody said in my ear that Virginia had gone to John Kerry, the Democrat, by 5 points. I remember thinking to myself, this is not possible. There is something wrong with these polls. And it was our first indication that the exit polls are wrong. We should bear that in mind tonight, by the way, because there was no way back in 2004 that a Democrat was going to win Virginia, let alone by 5 points.
Can I add also, one of the things that we find very interesting that is changing and possibly changing some states that are traditionally Republican states or red states, as we like to refer to them, to blue states or purple states, are that we see large numbers of African Americans and Latinos who were living in northern states and living in the Midwest are moving back in droves to the South because the cost of living is easier in the South. It's a lot less expensive, and for a variety of reasons. But it is changing the nature of the South. Georgia is the race to watch because of the large turnout expected of Latinos and African Americans
and to
in the
see
state.
if the growth of the Atlanta conurbation has turned the state more Democrat. I think you would have to say if Hillary Clinton was to win Georgia tonight, it's a wave election. On the other hand, if she's struggling to win Virginia, Mr. Trump is in there with a chance of the White House. You mentioned the red states. I just want to explain to our viewers across the world. It's a little confusing in the United States, and many things are, because in most of the world, red means the left. Red is the socialist, the social democratic colour. The British Labour Party sings the red flag. We remember the Soviet Union was the red menace, and so on. And blue normally means conservative, to the right of centre, as in a true blue Tory. Here in America, well, it's a new country, I guess. It takes a while to catch up with it here. Blue is the Democrats. Blue is to the left and centre left, and red is to the right and centre right.
Andrew, we can thank Tim Russert, the late Tim Russert, for that.
Late great
You
Tim
remember
Russert.
that Tim Russert put these graphs up, and he used to draw these things, and he was the first one to do a map that used the colors and picked those colors.
So he just did that himself. You see the power of the media.
Yes,
You thought it had something to do with the driving.
And I thought there was a
Andrew's going to get ideas now. He's going to think he could change the whole system again and introduce
What
yellow
can we
and purple.
say that will change? And of course, purple states mean that they're a mixture of red and blue. So anyway, just remember, red is Republican, blue is Democrat. Purple is we don't quite know. Now, the financial markets, particularly the Dow here in New York, soared on the prospect of a Clinton victory in the past 24 hours. It's interesting that Wall Street wants a Democrat to win rather than a Republican. So let's just find out what the business consequences could be of a Trump victory. Michelle Fleury is our North American business correspondent. She's on the roof of the BBC's facilities in New York. Michelle, if it looks like Mr. Trump is winning tonight, do the markets now go in the opposite direction?
I think we can pretty much assume that is exactly what would happen based on the financial markets over the last couple of weeks. When we saw the polls narrow, the market started to fall. We saw the S&P 500 had a 9-day streak where for 9 days in a row it closed lower. The last time it had done that was 35 years ago. Then suddenly, as it seemed like Hillary Clinton potentially might win, the markets rose higher. We saw the S&P 500 have its best 2 days in years, all on the prospect that investors think that potentially a Clinton win would be good for them, a Donald Trump win, which is seen as more uncertain, less predictable. That's why the markets are more concerned. If it looked like he was winning, you could expect a bumpy road ahead on the financial markets.
All right, Michelle, thank you for that. Which is interesting. We are used to Wall Street wanting a Republican to win and getting a bit nervous if a Democrat wins. And of course, if you were a Trump supporter, you would say, that only shows she's the candidate of Wall Street in this situation. But of course, I would just remind our viewers that the market soared on the prospect of a Brexit, of not winning, of Remain voting on June the 23rd.
Markets don't like uncertainty.
Yes.
And Donald Trump has not laid out a very comprehensive list of policies, and there is a lot of concern about what a Trump presidency would mean for America domestically and America internationally. And I think that's what you're seeing in the markets. It's a reflection of uncertainty.
I would guess that Wall Street's ideal result would probably be Clinton in the White House, but the Republicans still controlling the Congress.
Yes, they
of course,
would probably
one of the ironies here is if you go back over the last 100 years, the markets do extraordinarily well with Democratic presidents and very poorly with Republican presidents. So when they show those preferences, usually it may not reflect their economic self-interest, or it may reflect the fact that we shouldn't listen a whole lot to them.
Okay, well, that may be a very good idea. Yeah. And indeed, under Mr. Obama, the S&P has shown an average increase of 15% a year.
Well, let's speak to another Republican, in fact, a former presidential candidate, Republican Jim Gilmore, former governor of Virginia, former chairman of the Republican National Committee. Jim Gilmore, you dropped out of this race back in February. Having looked at how it's gone during the course of this year, I'm wondering whether you're not rather glad you didn't run for the whole thing.
Well, no, I don't regret for 1 minute entering the presidential race. I had an opportunity to meet people all across the United States, particularly in New England, and it was a wonderful experience. I learned a lot, but now the key thing is that we have to make sure that the future of the United States is intact and secure, and of course we're making a big decision on that tonight.
Okay, you have supported Donald Trump in his bid to become president of the United States. The same is not true of all of your Republican colleagues. And as we said earlier, today we got the news that former President George W. Bush and his wife Laura voted today, but they did not vote for Donald Trump. What does this all bode for the future of the Republican Party, of your party?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think the Republican Party is going to be in a crisis at the end of this election, unless Donald Trump is elected president. Then I think he will guide the Republican Party in a particular direction. But let me be direct about this. The national Republican leaders who did not support the candidate this year, I believe, are wrong. I believe that we have a general direction of the nation that is at issue here in this presidential campaign, whether you're going to move more to the right or more to the left. And I chose my party's candidate because I believe that Hillary Clinton will be very bad for the economy, will be very bad for investment in this country.
But many of them, of course,
bad for jobs.
Many of them said, Governor, that they couldn't support the unsupportable, that some of the things that Donald Trump had said, particularly about women, in that Access Hollywood tape where he talks about groping women that has been seen as sexual assault, that they just couldn't support Donald Trump. Were you okay with what Donald Trump has said and done about women? Is that why you've supported
well,
him?
of course not. You're not okay with that kind of thing. But the main thing is that we have a direct comparison here between Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. And the question is, what are the big picture directions for the United States of America? We need to be a strong country, one with a growth that exceeds this miserable 1-2% that we've been seeing for many, many years. We need to make sure that our military is intact, that we're good leaders of NATO, that we're wonderful partners with the United Kingdom and other allies across the world. And we're not going to see that. We're going to see more of the same that we've seen for the last 8 years. The American people know that that's not good. They want to change. That's the reason why this election is still in doubt, because the American people want to change. Hillary Clinton doesn't represent change. She represents the same. And that's the difference. And that's what made me decide that despite the criticism of both party candidates, that I would choose my own party's candidate and stay with it. And I think national Republican leaders that betrayed their local rank and file people who are out there putting up signs, going to the polls, calling people on the telephone, I think those national leaders that don't support those rank and file people are guilty of a betrayal.
All right, Governor, thanks for that. I guess George W. Bush didn't get the memo about that since he didn't vote for Mr. Trump today, we are told. Let's just have a look outside. We're here in Times Square. It's where New Yorkers gather on presidential elections night. That's already beginning to happen. ABC News, our partner broadcaster here in the United States, there they are waving on a bus going by. Yes, they always wave, actually, on buses going by. They have no idea what they're waving at, but even so, there is the ABC News studios on the other side of Times Square. Of course, we are embedded in there, waiting as they project the results. We'll bring it to you just as soon as they do. The excitement is building up. More and more people are going to come into Times Square as the evening goes on. So if that bus wants to get anywhere else, it better get out of there quickly or suffer some gridlock. Let's now. What we're going to talk a lot about tonight is the changing face of America, the changing demographic face of America, and Jeremy has more on that.
Yes, Andrew, race, that one word underlies a lot of what's happening here in this election, a lot of what we've heard in the run-up to Election Day. And it'll be possible to look at the polls afterwards and see how the vote is broken down. And in many cases, race may well be a factor. Let's just have a look here and see these very interesting figures about voting preference. If we look at white Americans and how they vote, you can see that the majority do go for the red column, the Republicans, for Trump. So 53% for Trump among white voters compared to 39% for Hillary Clinton. Go, on the other hand, to black voters, to African Americans. My goodness, the margin for Clinton is just extraordinary, more than 80%. By the way, it was even greater for Barack Obama. So if we look at Hispanic voters now, or Latinos, 67% to 27%. Again, a really massive margin for Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. So the thrust of this is that Trump is stronger in the largest group here in the electorate. But Hillary Clinton is way ahead in these growing, burgeoning minority groups. And the question, of course, is how that will affect each state's voting. Let's take a wider look at America, the changing face of the USA. We go back to the presidency of Ronald Reagan in the early 80s, and we look at the breakdown of the country. So we see here that 8 out of 10 voters in those days were white. And we go down, it's 12% black and Hispanic 6%. And this is a graph. You've talked a lot in the studio about how America is changing. Just watch this as we go through the years since Reagan, and we come now to 2016. Have a look. It's gone from 80% white to 62% white. And that second line, the 18%, is actually Latino, not black voters. So you can see that the Latino presence in the electorate has trebled in the last 3 to 4 decades. Quite remarkable. How will that affect voting in states? Well, there may be some states where it doesn't matter that much. Take a look, for example, at this one. So, Ohio, talked about a lot in the Rust Belt, flashing here on our map, and 18 electoral votes. Significance of Ohio, firstly, it's tight between the two parties. You can see here on the map, lots of rural Republican areas. The city's classically blue, but the really interesting thing is how accurately it's foreseen the winning candidate all the way back to Bill Clinton's first victory in '92. So Clinton, Bush, and then Obama, and maybe tonight it will vote the same way as the winning candidate again. Now, Trump has hopes in Ohio, and this is why. Have a look at the changing demographic in Ohio specifically. Remember we said how 80% whites in 1980 all over the USA. It was even higher in Ohio going back to the early 80s. But as America changed around it, the demographics of Ohio didn't change that much. So it went from 88% to 80% over 35 years. And meanwhile, the minority voters, Latinos, black voters, didn't change all that much. And that is why Trump hopes that he can take a state like Ohio, because he knows he is strongest among white voters. And in places where white voters are dominant, he has a good chance. Of course, his problem is in states like Florida, where you have a hugely fast increasing minority voting population, there's a danger that even if he turbocharges his core vote, he can't overwhelm Clinton supporters. But you can see from this why he thinks he will win in Ohio. Andrew, race at the heart of this. Back to you.
Kathy.
So, Jeremy, I've got a question for you to do with what you were talking about disaffection with politicians just a short while ago. It's clear that it's happening here. Is it happening in the United Kingdom as well, and in other countries in Europe and in the West as well? Just for our viewers around the world, is this a singularly American phenomenon, or is this a global phenomenon?
It's so interesting you say that, because just after we did that graphic, I had a look at Twitter and somebody said, this is not to do with Clinton or Trump, it's a much wider thing. It's Western politics and maybe even global politics. I think it's to do with the power of social media. It's the power of what they call the return path. It's voters coming back at you if you're a politician, which creates a culture of no more heroes. It may be that we just look more closely at stuff that's done on our behalf by our leaders. Obviously, the USA had the Clinton White House and it had the Iraq War in Afghanistan. We had the same in the UK. So yes, for certain, I think there's been a change in the UK as well, in that politicians are not, and all figures of authority, whether they're park keepers or archbishops, are not now granted automatic respect. It's a change we're all dealing with.
You know what, Andrew? I think it's true of journalists too. Unfortunately, we're not granted automatic respect anymore.
When did that happen?
I don't know. I think it happened yesterday, actually. Last week.
Are we the evil mainstream media?
Jeremy, thanks.
I can't really believe that's the case. Now, as Jeremy was explaining there, the changing demographics of the United States, the growth of the Hispanic vote, more Asian voters coming to this country as well, the millennials who have different attitudes from their parents, even young white millennials are very different often from their older white parents. All that has resulted in a different politics in America. And Mr. Trump, the manner of his campaign has cut off a number of routes to the White House. It means his support is overwhelmingly concentrated in the southern states, traditionally Republican, and in those states where there are lots of white blue-collar workers, the Midwest states round the Great Lakes. Now, Michel Bernard is still with us, and we're joined now by Ron Christie. He's a Republican strategist. Ron, I would suggest that, since you're a strategist, that it's not a great strategy for your party to tie itself to the declining part of the population and do really badly in the growing part of the population.
You're preaching to the choir.
Well, give us a song.
Let me give you a song. Look, politics is quite simply, it's about addition rather than subtraction. If you can't add more people of color, if you can't add more college-educated white women to the GOP, we're done.
And that's the Grand Old Party, which is the Republican nickname.
Indeed. And so what you're going to find tonight is, in order for Donald Trump to win, he has to do better with the white vote than what, of course, Mitt Romney did, which was 59% of the white vote. And so when you look at the millennials, who, by the way, are now tied with the baby boomers, the senior population here in the United States, as the largest voting bloc, if you can't peel off on young people, people of color, and women, Trump has a very difficult path tonight.
And in a nutshell, does that sum up why, whereas Mrs. Clinton has many paths to the White House. Of course, she may fail in all of them, but she has. That Mr. Trump's routes to the White House are quite limited.
They're very narrow. And now that we're in the 7 o'clock hour here in the United States, you look at the southern states. He has to do extraordinarily well in South Carolina. How is he going to do in North Carolina? How is he going to do in Georgia? And so when you start looking at some of these key states in the South, Andrew, if Trump cannot do well in these southern states, his narrow path almost becomes extinct.
All right. Well, as we're saying, he has fewer routes to the White House, but he has routes to the White House, and they certainly aren't closed yet. And Emily will give us more details on how it could be President Trump.
It could be, and Ron's point is right, that it just feels narrower at this point. People talk about the difficulty of the mathematical route because, of course, this time round we are talking about electoral college votes, and the key thing for either candidate is to get past this crucial figure of 270 of those. They are spread out through the states according to the size of the population. They're not the landmass. So this is the map as it looks at the moment, coloured up just by the states that have been projected so far, Indiana and Kentucky for Donald Trump. The small state of Vermont, just 3 electoral college votes there for Hillary Clinton. And this is what has to happen for Donald Trump to make it through. Let me put into this map of real results what we're going to call our campaign polls. This is how the campaign polls coloured up the safer seats. In other words, before the actual election, this is what happened. This is how the campaigns have coloured it up. Everything in blue is considered to be safe Democratic seats. Everything in red is considered to be safely Republican. And all these grey bits and pieces are the real battles of the night. Those are the ones we're going to be watching most closely. What I'm going to do now is go into my calculator mode. And at this point, I can use one of the pens and I can colour in the states according to what we're imagining could happen tonight. So as things stand, Clinton has what they call a blue wall. She has a more solid base of Democratic states on 200, according to the campaign polls. Trump only has 180. He's short by 90. In other words, he already has further to climb at this point. How does he do it? Well, let's imagine that he got at least what Romney got last time round in 2012. Mitt Romney picked up Arizona, so we're going to colour that in red. And he also got North Carolina, and we're going to colour that in red. That's another 15 in North Carolina, but he's still short by 64. So even as the map looks now, he can't do it. He's short by 64. What else could go his way? Well, it looks like could be his tonight. Another 6 electoral college votes there. He's also campaigned tirelessly in Ohio. I've seen him myself on the stump there in Toledo, in that Rust Belt part of America around the Great Lakes. He expects to take Ohio tonight. Even if he does, he's still short by 40. What does he need then? The really big battle states. Let's imagine, although Florida is neck and neck at the moment, that he takes Florida tonight. It's another 29 electoral college votes, but he's still short by 11. OK, let's chuck in a few more then. What about New Hampshire? He thinks he can probably win that. It's the only part of the Northeast that he's really set his sights on. He won his first primary in New Hampshire and he had a superbly big rally that night. They liked him very much for the Republican side in New Hampshire. What about Maine? I'm adding these in bit by bit. He's still short, OK? He's still short by 6, even when he has Arizona, North Carolina, Ohio, Florida, New Hampshire. A lot of these are in the balance. What has to happen? He has to take another one of these really big states now. He has to take Virginia, which Obama won twice. He has to take Pennsylvania, which has a solid blue run behind it, or Michigan or Wisconsin, which his campaign manager said tonight is looking tough. You can read into tough what you will. Colorado, the demographics changing there. It's becoming more Hispanic. Nevada, centred really around Vegas. He's quite a big presence in Vegas. Let's imagine he does it with Nevada. At that point, he has crossed the magic line and he has got that number, 270. He has a path to the White House. But can you see how much of the map we've had to colour in? How long it's taken me?
Everything has to go right for him.
Yes. This is what they say, isn't it? That Hillary Clinton can afford to lose Florida or Pennsylvania or Ohio. Donald Trump pretty much needs all those 3 major battlegrounds. Without them, it's very hard.
And the trouble is, we know from early voting, and there has been record turnout in early voting, that at least Nevada, possibly even Florida, are actually looking better for Hillary Clinton than they are for Donald Trump. We've been talking about demographics. One of the most interesting thing about Hispanics, and I'm sure Ron knows this, it's the thing that keeps Republican strategists up at night, is that every month 50,000 Hispanics turn 18.
Yes.
That makes them eligible voters. Now, in the past, they haven't turned out to vote. Hispanics have turned out to vote in lower numbers than any other demographic
But he gave them
group.
a reason for Mr. Trump.
But you look at
He
this
gave them a
election. I mean,
reason this
Norm, what
time.
do you think? Do you think they're going to change this time around?
We already know from the Latino Decisions exit poll that there's an even stronger tilt towards Mrs. Clinton. The exit polls tell us a little bit,
and turnout,
and the early voting. But for beyond the early voting, what Trump has to do is get a massive turnout today on Election Day in Republican areas with Republicans coming home. And there will be some states where that might happen. But what we can see from some of the votes coming in Florida now for today is that, for example, in Duval County, which is around Jacksonville, a Republican stronghold, the numbers are not coming in a fashion that would make him feel comfortable. I'd make one other point, though. Robbie Mook, the Clinton campaign manager, said a little earlier tonight that we might not know North Carolina's results tonight. And it's not simply because it's that close. There they've had tremendous problems. In the area around Durham, where Duke University is, I don't know why, maybe it was Russian hacking or maybe it was just a screw-up, but the electronic poll books have been way off. And now we've got a dispute going on whether the North Carolina Board of Elections will extend those voting hours.
Right.
We may find this in a couple of other places.
But let me interrupt you, Norm, because we don't know the result yet, but we can tell you now that 3 million votes have now been counted in Florida. 3 million, still a long way to go. And the results so far, Clinton, 49%, Trump, 48%. I think the word cliffhanger comes to mind, because we've been there before in this most swing of swing states. Now, it's coming up to 7:30 here in New York on New York time. Let's go back to Emily, because some more states are about to close, and we may even be able to project some results.
I'm just having a look at this because we're expecting West Virginia to get called any moment. West Virginia will not be a big surprise on the night, I'm guessing. It is heartland Trump supporters there. It's white working class, one of the poorest states in America, and home to some of Trump's most loyal supporters. Let's just see whether we can get that result now. Yes, it has gone red. Red means it has been projected for Trump. He'll be pleased to have that in the bag, but I would have thought not that surprised by it. Let's just go through to some of the other ones that we're expecting tonight. If we can scroll through, let me go back to my list here. These are the ones that we're going to be watching. West Virginia, we've already seen turn red. Ohio and North Carolina. Now, I would say some of the most exciting races of the night. If I take you into Ohio, you can see it's too early to project. As I said, this is the kind of place that Trump will really feel he's started to make a move towards that mountain he has to climb. If he can take Ohio, it lands him 18 electoral college votes. No Republican has won the presidency without Ohio. If he doesn't win Ohio, it starts to look a little bit more shaky. Of course, this is the election of new precedents, of rules being ripped up. But certainly he will hope to take Ohio tonight. And if he doesn't, it will start to mean that his path gets even more difficult than I already suggested it would. Let's just take you to one more if we can. And that's North Carolina. Now, you heard Ron was talking about the kind of battles that we've seen here in North Carolina. There have been allegations by the Democrats of voter suppression, really, certainly of the African-American voting areas, let's say, where they had fewer days and it was Republican-backed laws that made it much harder for them to get to the polls. North Carolina, also the scene of quite a lot of racial tension a little bit earlier in the autumn, in September. This is somewhere that they have both campaigned tirelessly and right up till the last moment. And you can see from its electoral history, it's particularly interesting. Obama won it once, lost it once. Romney took it in 2012. This is somewhere that Donald Trump has been saying he can take and he expects to take. But if the Democrats take it back tonight, they'll be pretty pleased with that, I would have thought. That definitely makes her route a little bit easier. So how is the map coloured up? We've only got one new addition in this half hour. You can see Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, all solid Republican heartland states have gone for Donald Trump. They're in red. And the sole state of Vermont, 3 for Hillary Clinton. Don't read too much into these early results. It's just a reflection of which polls and which states close when.
Thanks, Emily. So no surprises so far. Early days, those states that were meant to go for Mr. Trump have gone for Mr. Trump, and the state that we know so far that was meant to go to Mrs. Clinton, Vermont, has gone to Mrs. Clinton. Now, Emily mentioned Ohio there, and of course, Mr. Trump has to win it, but he has been ahead in the polls in Ohio most of the time. He must be is leaning towards him at the moment.
I think of all of those close battleground states, that's probably the one that he feels most favourable about. And we should remember that tonight we're not just talking about a presidential election, we're also talking about elections for the Senate, for the third of the senators who are up for re-election, and that's a cliffhanger as well between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans hold the Senate at the moment. The Democrats would like to take it back. And one of the Senate races that we've been looking at actually is Ohio. Rob Portman, he is the senator from Ohio. He's a Republican. He has just been re-elected to the US Senate. It wasn't a massively close race. It had been close at certain times. It was one perhaps that the Democrats might have hoped to pick up earlier on.
They did at one stage think they might get it.
About a couple of months ago, they thought they might get it. But Rob Portman is one of those more moderate Republicans in the Senate. He's seen as somebody that Democrats can do business with. He does that thing that is becoming increasingly unforgivable in American politics, and that's compromise, Ron. He looks like he might be sticking in for his job a bit longer.
It'll never catch on, this compromise business. Michelle, you can criticise Mr. Trump for narrowing his route to the White House, almost doing it, knowing he was doing it. On the other hand, the Rust Belt strategy must have been doing something to work, because what did we see in the final days? Mrs. Clinton rushing off to Michigan. Yes. Mrs. Clinton starting yesterday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not finishing, but second last stop last night, Philadelphia. Yes. It seemed to me the Clinton campaign began to get worried that some of the Rust Belt states they thought they had were back in contention.
Absolutely. And the reason for that is that Donald Trump, in addition to the many things that we've discussed that he has tapped into, Donald Trump has been able to tap into this area of the nation where manufacturing jobs have decreased. For example, when he talks about the impact of NAFTA and globalization and free trade, and he is anti free trade and talks about.
But of course, it was Mrs. Clinton's husband who famously signed the North American Free Trade Area.
Exactly. And so when people hear from Donald Trump, I'm going to bring jobs back to the state. Manufacturing is coming back to Michigan. Manufacturing will come back to Ohio. Those are people who are very happy to hear someone who is telling what they need to hear. West Virginia, Mrs. Clinton is famously anti-coal. We have from Donald Trump that West Virginia will continue to be coal country.
Which is a big coal state.
It's a big coal state.
Big coal state.
And so we also see globalization and free trade on trial in our election tonight.
Okay, Michelle, let's go to Pennsylvania now. The BBC's Jane O'Brien is there in Philadelphia in a very jolly-looking bar, Jane. I hope that you're staying at least for a little bit longer, since we haven't got the result yet from Pennsylvania. But this is a very important state for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump to win. It's one they've both spent an awful lot of time in, isn't it?
That's right, and as you can hear, the party is still going. It's a hangover from the star-studded rally that she held here last night. Philadelphia is, of course, a hotbed of Clinton support, but not like the whole of Pennsylvania, and that's why both candidates have been campaigning here right up to the wire. I'm actually at McGillen's historic pub, and most people here are Clinton supporters. But I do have something as rare as the sighting of a pink unicorn, and that is a Trump supporter. Jack Cannelli, you voted for Mr. Trump this morning, but you voted in Western Pennsylvania. That's one of the Rust Belt areas that we keep talking about. Why do you support him?
I voted for Donald Trump because of the Second Amendment rights. We need to protect our military. We need to bring this country back to where it was before.
Well, where was it before? What exactly do you want to see? Because it's changing so fast. Is it possible?
There are a lot of different things that's changed over the years. In the last 8 years with Obamacare and everything else, there's a lot of things that have happened that really have hurt a lot of people. My own son, who's a self-employed individual, had to pay a fine of $750 because he himself didn't have insurance, while all the other immigrants that are coming into this country are getting free insurance. on the back of everybody else. We need to change that. That is something that's definitely wrong. It has to change.
Well, now that's your perception of the problem where you live. But how will Donald Trump actually make a difference? Because we haven't heard that much of his policies.
Once he said here when he did his speech in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania here about 10 days ago, what he was going to do in his first 100 days of office, how he was going to change America, how he's going to shake up Washington, D.C., how all the liberals and all the other people are just going to run for cover. It's just his way of doing things. You can't take anything away from him. He is a brilliant man.
Do you have any confidence that Hillary Clinton, though, is listening to people like you who clearly feel that you've been left out of the changes that America has seen?
Well, she's run on her thing that she's been in politics for 30 plus years. What has she fixed in those 30 years? Nothing. She's part of the problem.
So, Jack Cannelli, thank you very much. Very quick question. How do you feel about being in this bar with all these Hillary supporters?
Well, I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be a Donald Trump supporter.
And you're also a former Marine. I guess that makes a difference.
Ma'am. Hoorah!
Hoorah indeed. Back to you.
Okay, Jane, thank you very much. That's the kind of unity that America needs to start seeing after this election. A Trump supporter in a Clinton bar. We need more of that. Let's check in with the Clinton headquarters, a few blocks from where we are in downtown Manhattan. Kim Gattas is there. What's the mood now as some of these states are starting to close? Some of them are being called, some of them being projected. What are they making of it all there, Kim?
Cautiously confident, Catty. There's already a crowd of supporters here, but it's too early in the night to tell how good the result will be for Hillary Clinton, who is expecting to win. I've been speaking to several of her aides over the last few days, traveling with them on the campaign plane, checking in with them tonight. They're still telling me that they feel good about the result. They're not telling me how good they feel. A few days ago, they told me that they were hoping to cross beyond 270, beyond 300 electoral votes even. Of course, we'll have to see how it plays out this evening. But they're counting very much on the ground game that they've been working on for so long now, for 18 months, to get the vote out. Not only the early votes in those states where early voting is allowed, but also in those crucial states, those battleground states on the day of the election today, including states like Pennsylvania. She had a last-minute mad dash across some of these states yesterday, finishing at 3 in the morning, back from Pennsylvania, from Michigan, from North Carolina. This was her last day of campaigning. She had it, she put all her efforts into that, and now it's a waiting game. Her aides tell me that she has prepared 2 speeches, a victory speech and a concession speech. But as one aide told me, they expect a victory, except, of course, if a strange, freaky confluence of events comes together and means that there is an upset here. And, of course, they don't expect that, but we have to remember that it has been that kind of year.
More than that kind of year.
It certainly has. Kim Gattas there at the Clinton headquarters, a few blocks away. Maybe she'll have to start drafting a third speech for a tied result. Now, Norm, help me here. Florida.
I'll try.
The data geeks, as I'm calling them, they think Florida's looking good for Hillary. They say she's doing well in key swing counties. A bunch of Democrat favorable areas still to declare. But with over 5 million votes in Florida now counted, 5 million proper votes, it's Trump 49, Clinton 48, even Stevens.
We just have to remember 5 million sounds like a big number. In a big state like Florida, it's not. We still have a sliver of the vote in. And a lot of those early votes, we have, for example, almost nothing in from Miami-Dade, which is a huge county that is a very, very Democratic one. Yeah. We know from the exit polls in Florida, where you're going to get a stronger Hispanic vote for Trump than you will in other places because of the Cuban Americans, that he is doing much more poorly than Mitt Romney did the last time. And we know that, as I mentioned earlier, Andrew, in one place where we're getting a sizable number of votes in, at least a third of the precincts, Duval County, which is Jacksonville, it's dead even, and that's a very Republican area. Trump probably needs to win that county by 300,000 votes to have any kind of a chance, and right now he's not. So it's still way too early to make any projections, but all of the early expectations that we had, that Florida was going to be a good state for Clinton because of that surge in early voting and the Hispanic votes, suggests that we shouldn't pay a lot of attention to a Trump lead at this point.
As we start to get, and our viewers as well will be getting on their Twitter feeds and on their mobile phones, these kind of early indications, it's really worth reminding everybody that each state is almost like a country. And we have to make sure that we've got representation from every bit of the country before we can draw any conclusions, right, Ron?
That's exactly right, Katty. And I want to go back to something that you and Emily touched on a little bit ago. Ohio is that country. Ohio is that state. 18 electoral college votes, yes, very important. Rob Portman's resounding early victory, I think, is a good sign for the Republicans. And here's another area where I think Republicans can take heart. John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, was resoundingly reelected 2 years ago with 27% of the African-American vote and over 40% of the Hispanic vote. Seems to me that if a Republican governor can get those sorts of numbers and the Republican senator can get reelected so early tonight, that might very well trend well for Mr. Trump.
All right. In Virginia, 15% of the precincts have been counted there. Mr. Trump is leading 54-41. And of course, again, that doesn't necessarily mean anything because it depends on the precincts. If most of the precincts being counted come from the rural areas, that is more likely to be for Mr. Trump.
And that's just what's happening.
And if they haven't started counting in the north. You do wonder, though, that since the north is meant to have the college-educated pro-Clinton ones, that why is it that the non-college-educated rural folks can count more quickly than those in the northern areas? You think they could actually just get their act together so that we get a better picture on Virginia.
Have you ever been in a university faculty meeting, Andrew?
It's the universities that are running it. And we got more on Virginia and the exit polls about women voters and so on. Let's go back to Jeremy.
Thank you. I was just enjoying that conversation there. Let's just have a look at Virginia. As we get exit poll data, we're just parsing it and we're seeing what we can tell you. And here we have a look at the state that should say, importantly, it went Democrat with Barack Obama in 2008. And what Katty Kay said earlier was a real shock result that made you think, hang on, are the polls wrong? It hadn't been Democrat since 1964. It now seems to be reliably Democrat. But let us see here what we can tell you. Now, here is exit poll data on the vote among women in Virginia. And you can see here Trump is way behind Hillary Clinton. She's on 57%. And he's on 38. So among women, Hillary Clinton has an immense lead. Exit poll data among men, something like 5%. So that is a really interesting insight into a state which is starting to look much less competitive, much more Democrat, and it's going well there for Hillary.
Jeremy, thanks for that. Again, Virginia, one of the key states that we're keeping an eye on tonight. In a sense, if Mr. Trump can win Virginia, that's a big if, then he's definitely still in the race. But if Mrs. Clinton wins it, then she is well on her way to the White House. That's
Andrew,
why we're looking so carefully at this. So
just
what, have they started counting yet?
Yeah, one quick point on Virginia. There's a suburban county, Loudoun County, that has been a bellwether in Virginia before. It went for Obama by about the same margin that he won the entire state by. Right now, she's winning by 16 points in that county.
So you would say that from what we know from drilling down into the counties, that Mrs. Clinton is on track to win Virginia quite comfortably?
Quite comfortably, it sure looks that way.
Mr. Obama won it by 4% in 2012.
And he won Loudoun County by 4, and now she's up by 16. And that's a sign that these educated white women, I think, are really moving even more sharply in her direction.
Loudoun County is a county I've spent quite a lot of time in. It's one of the richest counties in the United States. Actually, Northern Virginia has 3 of the richest counties in the United States. Loudoun County is one of them. It's got a lot of these suburban women voters, Andrew, and a lot of independent suburban women voters as well, who many of whom only made up their minds in the last couple of weeks. But if Norm's numbers are right from Loudoun County, that's a very good sign for Hillary Clinton. It suggests that a lot of those women are turning out to
to
vote
vote.
for her.
All right. We have now got two more guests here. We've got Ben LeBeau, who used to work for Mr. Obama, and Suzanne Del Percio, who is a Republican, but not a Trump Republican. Is that
I'm
fair?
not supporting Donald Trump for president.
Susan. Susan, how's it going?
Well, it's still early to tell, although like your previous guest said, there's some good news on the horizon for Republicans, seeing Portman win so decisively and so early in Ohio. But we still have a way to go.
What would you say, Ben?
Well, I think it's looking like a good night, certainly better than the night
Look at that
we
smile
had
on
a
Ben
couple of
LeBeau's
years
face.
ago.
Why are you smiling?
Senate.
What's causing you to smile?
Well, we don't want to be overly optimistic, but I think that the early numbers are positive. Look, if Hillary Clinton wins the state of Virginia, which hadn't been in play for Democrats before President Obama won it in a long time in 2008, that's the start of a very good night. She actually doesn't even have to win the state of Florida if she picks up Colorado and Nevada after that. So she's got a lot of paths to the presidency. If she can win Virginia early, that's a very good sign on where she's headed tonight.
So if she wins Virginia, she doesn't need to win Florida, you're telling us?
She doesn't have to. I mean, that's the difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump tonight, is that she has many options to get to 270 electoral votes to win the presidency. Donald Trump has a narrow path tonight. He has to perform very well in the states that are still in play.
And he has, above all, to win Florida.
I think if Donald Trump doesn't win Florida, it will be nearly impossible for him to win the presidency. He'll have to win a series of states that Democratic presidents have won recently, states like Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota, where he has campaigned late, but it would be a big surprise for him to win in those states.
Susan, you've been a lifelong Republican. You're a Republican strategist. You work for Republicans.
I do.
But you haven't voted for Donald Trump. Explain to us why, how you came to that decision. What was it?
Well, I don't see Donald Trump as a Republican. I see him as an opportunist. I see him as someone who ran as a populist, who certainly ran away with the nomination. He took out 16 other very good Republicans because he was able to effectively speak to the voter who feels like they were left behind. And that is that's how he won. And that's why he does have cross-party appeal, like some of the Bernie Sanders voters. He really does reach across to a union worker, for example, who hears his opinion on trade. Donald Trump is not a free trader. That's a tenet of the Republican Party. It believes in free trade. So for me, it wasn't a hard decision not to support him because I don't feel like I'm dissing the Republican Party in any way. He's not a Republican.
So what did you do today?
I did not vote for either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton.
Who did you vote for?
I will not share that with you.
Well, there's only two others on the ballot.
You don't have to only
You
vote
can
for
write
the-
in.
Did you write in?
I'm not.
Did you spoil it? None of the above.
Disclosure, I wanted to make it clear I didn't vote for either one.
All right, I think we can now talk to a former director of the CIA. He's also a Trump supporter in our DC bureau. Let's go to James Woolsey. Mr. Woolsey, welcome to the program. It's good to see you. How do you think it's going so far for Mr. Trump?
Close. I could go either way. Some of the early returns look a bit more favorable for Hillary Clinton, but not decisive and not necessarily at anything that would shut off a Trump surge. So we just all have to sit here and watch these lights flickering on our television sets for a while.
Well, I'm glad they're still flickering. It means we must have paid the electricity bill. But are you happy with the way that, in the manner of Mr. Trump's campaign, was that he ended up depending so much, overwhelmingly, on not just white voters, but white voters without a college degree, not just those, but also white male voters? Was that a sensible strategy?
Well, I think he tried for all, and the thing that has set him aside in a way has been a very unique, what's called in the musical trade, shtick, a routine that put some people off, some aspects of it put me off, but it also got a lot of attention and was ultimately, I think, drew a lot of people to him. Sometimes such a pattern of the way he speaks and so forth is popular, sometimes it's not. When I've met with him privately and talked to him on the phone, none of the kind of bombast of his public speaking is there. It's always been a very straightforward matter of fact, Jim, how about this, how about that? I don't know. I don't think that the way he's approached this has excluded any potential voters or.
Well, let me
maybe
ask you
included.
this.
I don't know.
Because I understand you're not a campaign strategist, but you are a former director of the CIA. Have you been comfortable with the fact that he's barely uttered a word of criticism either of Russia or of President Putin?
Well, we have to talk nicely to some countries that we have diplomatic relations with, even though we realize that at basis we're very hostile to them and them to us. The U.S. and Britain were close allies of Stalin, at that point the greatest killer of humanity in history in World War II.
Well, I think that's because we faced an existential threat from Hitler.
Sure.
I mean, we didn't just
Absolutely.
become friends for Uncle Joe for the sake of it. We needed help in beating the Nazis. But it's rather different from Mr. Trump and the Kremlin.
But anybody who thinks that expressions of friendliness and even to some degree hostility and so forth in a campaign or definitive policy statements is just wrong. Nobody uses them for that.
Well,
I think
are
that
you happy?
what I'm not happy with is Hillary Clinton's approach. Well, let me get to one point here. What I'm not happy with is Hillary Clinton's approach toward maintaining national secrets and toward taking care that we have a decent foreign policy that is not run in craziness and is not reflective of what President Obama has done, which is to make it much easier for the Iranians to get a nuclear weapon. I think those issues absolutely dwarf style and nuance and of speaking and so forth.
Well, do they, Mr. Woolsey, are you happy also that your candidate has described NATO as obsolete and doesn't seem to be a supporter of it at a time when Russia has been on both hard and soft war maneuvers on the eastern borders of Europe? Is that a sensible foreign policy for the United States to pursue?
Ever since 1949 and NATO's formation, the United States, which carries pulls the laboring oar in terms of financing and the forces for NATO, has always been criticizing its European allies because they aren't doing more. This is nothing different than we have seen for 50, 60 years.
No presidential candidate has described NATO as obsolete until Mr. Trump.
I just don't think putting so much weight on which word he chooses to exhort NATO to do more is something that you want to bear down on from the point of view of understanding his foreign policy. It's really irrelevant.
All right, Mr. Woolsey, we'll leave it there.
Let's go now to California and to Congressman Javier Becerra. He is a Democrat. He joins us from our Los Angeles bureau. We've been talking a lot during the course of the evening already, Congressman, about the changing nature of America and the Hispanic vote. Historically, of course, Hispanics have not actually turned out to vote, even though there are now increasing numbers of them in the United States. Are you seeing a change in this election?
Dramatic. There is no doubt that this will be a record level turnout of Latinos this election, and it could be so large and so significant that it tips the election in some of these battleground states. So there's a very strong chance that we can say that the Latino vote will be the decisive vote in this election.
And is it entirely Donald Trump that they are voting against?
No. Hillary Clinton has a long history with the Latino community. She started working with the Latino community before she was ever in the public's eye so directly, but she has done a number of things during her public service, in her 30 years of public service, that has drawn her to the Latino community. So she had a history with us, and so she had a great deal of support, as did her husband. And as a result, that gave her an opportunity to really build on it. It helped, of course, that there was an opponent running for president who did everything to shun the Latino vote, from the Republican Party. And today, the party of Lincoln is paying the price of its nominee.
Congressman, we know that Hispanics in different states have different priorities. In California, they're interested in the economy. In Texas, they're interested in healthcare. In Florida, Hispanics say that their priority is actually terrorism. Where does immigration and immigration reform rank as an issue for Hispanics in America? And do they think that under President Clinton, they'll have any greater chance of getting comprehensive immigration reform in this country than they did under Barack Obama, who, after all, wanted to do it and tried to do it by executive order, but had those orders overturned by the courts?
Well, first, I think you'll find that Latinos throughout the country, regardless of their original heritage, probably place jobs, the economy, and education as the top priorities, as do most every other American family. Then after that, you'll find that issues like immigration are very personal because, like me, I'm the son of immigrants. It's still very close, and we all still know many people either within our family or within our neighborhoods and our reach who are impacted by immigration and this broken immigration system. So it's a very important issue, and we see it as very personal. So when politicians attack immigrants, we see that as an attack on our family, whether or not we are directly immigrants ourselves. And that's why this has become such a volatile issue for Republicans, because Donald Trump has turned this into a virtual ticking time bomb. And in a recent poll that came out just today by Latino Decisions, a polling organization that's very active in the Latino space, their poll just out today shows that the Latino vote is likely to go 79% for Hillary Clinton, 18% for Donald Trump. That is even below what Mitt Romney got 4 years ago.
Okay, Javier Becerra joining us there from Los Angeles. Thank you very much. Hispanics clearly the story, I think, of this election campaign, the changing face of America, and how those Hispanics are actually coming out to vote. We've got a few more states, in fact, a slew of them, about to close any second
now.
We'll
go back to Emily shortly. But Susan, I remember Ronald Reagan was proud of the fact that immigrants wanted to come to America. He said it was a shining city on a hill. He wanted them, even the illegal ones, to work a pathway towards legality. He once, I remember he said, Hispanics are actually Republican voters. They just don't know it yet. What has happened to your party when it's come to immigrants? Oh, I'm sorry. You got a chance to think of the answer to that because it is rush hour here when it comes to results. It's 8 o'clock New York time. We're getting a slew more states coming in, some of them crucial. Emily.
Yeah, we've got 20 states closing their polls now. And the big one to watch is Florida. Need I remind you of 2000, the hanging chads, the 3 decimal places, and the one vote in the Supreme Court that decided this one. Even last time, it was only won by 1% by Obama. So we are not expecting this to be called quickly. It was never even called last time round. But this is the state of the race. They've already counted a quarter of the votes, 25% of the precincts in, and Clinton just has the edge. She's actually taken places like Hillsborough County and Broward. Hillsborough is that Disney corridor that divides the Southern Democratic voting area and the Panhandle that tends to go Republican. We understand she has taken that county. She's on 49.4% to Trump's 47.7%. But lest I get carried away, there is 75% still of the vote to come in here. So we're just watching that, no predictions at all. Pennsylvania is another one that has just closed its polls. This was the place that Hillary Clinton made her final speech of the campaign last night with her husband, with Obama, with Michelle Obama, and that was where she signed off in this Rust Belt state, which has a good, solid Democrat history, I should say, for her. And let's just have a look at what we've got covering up so far. These are the ones coming in now. Oklahoma safely delivered in red to the Republicans for Trump. Mississippi also gone red for Trump. No surprises here. And this whole slew of the Northeast, which closes and has quickly gone into blue. That means essentially if we get anything called quickly, it means it was a pretty easy one to call or to project. No big surprises in the list you've got on either colour. Hillary Clinton has got 68 Electoral College votes. She needs 270 to win. She is short by 202. Donald Trump, as it stands, has 37, needs 270 to win. He is short by 133. We will be back watching, in particular, Florida and Virginia. The one thing I want to take you to, if I can, is Virginia, which I think is of particular interest now. We've got in 31%, let's call it a third of the vote, and Trump is taking the lead here. 54% of the counties we've had in, which is 6 when I last checked, 5 of them have gone red Republican. Clinton's on 41% share of the vote, Donald Trump on 54% share of the vote. If he could take Virginia tonight, with all that we've been saying about the changing demographic, about it becoming more Democrat voting, more educated in the North, that means a lot of rural Virginia has really rallied behind the Republican vote tonight. I don't want to make predictions. This one was never called last time either, and we've only got 31% in. But at the moment, I wouldn't be surprised if his campaign team were having a quiet little cheer in the back room somewhere.
Let me give a dissenting view in this case. When you look at counties in Virginia, the ones that are coming in, there are a couple that have been more Republican that are going for Clinton. Clinton will be very happy. These numbers don't mean very much. In Florida, Hillsborough County is Tampa, and it's a county that went twice for George Bush and then twice for Barack Obama. It's become a little more Democratic. Obama won by he got 53% the last time. It provided about half of his overall margin in Florida. She's now winning it by a more substantial margin. We still don't have all of the votes in there yet, but it's another good sign for her.
And one other piece of news that's just come in, which is that the North Carolina Board of Elections has, we've just heard, agreed to extend voting in 8 precincts in Durham County. We've talked about the different makeups of these states.
Which is part of what you might call the new North Carolina.
Raleigh-Durham, the Research Triangle as it's known. Democrats in Durham County have a 4-to-1 registration advantage over Republicans. Democrats will be glad to get those precincts, the voting time extended. And we should point out that if you are in the queue to vote in the United States before polling time ends, the polling station will stay open as long as it takes to get you through the queue.
So you just need to get in the queue.
You need to get in the queue.
And you get to vote.
You get to vote.
Norm, it's too early to make projections, but would it be fair to say that from what we know so far, particularly from an analysis of the counties, that Florida is trending towards Mrs. Clinton?
Florida's trending in that direction. Again, I will say that the early vote was an enormous advantage for her. But that is going to narrow overall because her voters turned out to early vote. There'll be more Trump voters voting today. But when we look at some of those areas, we mentioned before Duval County, now Hillsborough, that are starting to come in larger numbers, and you compare it to what Mitt Romney got the last time, and it was a very narrow margin in Florida, it's looking better for her than it did, say, at this point would have been for Obama.
Well, indeed.
It's also looking a lot better for her because of the Hispanic vote, because of the registration drive they have, because of the Puerto Ricans coming into Florida and being able to vote. They have done a tremendous job in Florida registering and getting the Hispanic community involved. And to your earlier question about what happened with Republicans.
I'm glad you haven't forgotten that.
I didn't forget. Let's not forget, 2 of the bluest and biggest states of the country, New York and California, both had Republican governors. It didn't just happen because of the registration. It happened because they worked so hard to build coalitions.
But who was the last Republican presidential candidate to win New York and California?
That is
I think
true,
his name was Ronald Reagan.
But my point is that you have to work to build the coalitions. You can't announce your candidacy and automatically turn off potentially 90% of a population. That just makes no sense, and that's exactly what Donald Trump did. So what I'm concerned about is, because it looks like this will be the Latino vote will be one of a game changer in this election with their turnout. I'm concerned that the Republican Party may have lost them for a generation.
Well, the interesting thing is, after the Republicans lost the last presidential election, the Republican National Committee did an autopsy on why they lost the election. They said this has to be an inclusive party the next time around, that's attractive to Hispanics, that's attracted to women. And a candidate like Jeb Bush
who was the early favorite of the establishment Republicans,
right.
tried to run that campaign, and he was roundly
Marco
rejected.
Rubio and, did immigration reform
But they were
because
both
he wanted
roundly
to run.
rejected by the Republican base in the primary. So there's going to be this massive reckoning where there still might be this split between the establishment in the party and the base, and that's going to take a long time for Republicans to sort out after
Are you
this
still
election.
smiling?
I'll be smiling all night. That's my hope.
Does it not concern you, smiling as you do, that the Democrats, I mean, we've heard the problems the Republicans have, and they're real, and basically things have got worse since that 2012 report into what's to be done. Does it not concern you that the Democrats are no longer the party of America's blue-collar workers?
Well, I think we'll see what the results say tonight. Look, if Hillary Clinton wins a state like Pennsylvania, if she wins a state like Michigan, that doesn't mean that she doesn't represent blue-collar voters.
Well,
the truth
if
is,
she wins it, she'll win it because of Philadelphia. She's not winning the rural areas or the old steel areas where the blue-collar workers are.
Many of those voters left the Democratic Party under Ronald Reagan, and they've been Republican since then.
Well, they
the
came
truth
back
is,
under Bill Clinton.
But if you look at the majority of America right now, it's a more diverse country. I think that Hillary Clinton tonight will win Hispanics. She'll win African Americans. She'll win suburban women.
I was asking about the one she wasn't winning, the blue-collar workers that used to be the backbone of the Democrat Party.
But I think that they will see, with Hillary Clinton as President of the United States, who, unlike Donald Trump, who's proposed tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans, which crashed the economy in the first place, that Hillary Clinton is going to be roundly focused on promoting the middle class
They are
over the
also
next 4 years.
the Democratic voters, Ben, that your former boss had problems with. Barack Obama didn't win those blue-collar workers. Let's just bring in a bit of news again from the Senate. According to exit polls projections that we're getting in, Marco Rubio has won the Senate race in Florida. The Republican, of course, who ran against Donald Trump had been, as Susan was just saying, perhaps one of the people that might have led the Republican Party in a different direction. When he ran for the presidency, he said he was not going to run again for the Senate. He jumped back into the race in the summer, and that threw everything up, and he has now just Marco Rubio. He'll be back
And that was
in the Senate.
that was a Senate seat in contention a while back, but ceased to be.
Again,
Pat
another
Murphy,
one, a
I
little
think,
bit
was
like
the
Ohio,
Democrat.
so
He'd basically kind of given up. They'd stopped spending
not
money
a huge
there.
surprise that the
But
Republicans
for
have won
Marco
those two.
Rubio to be called this early means he is tremendously outperforming Donald Trump in the
Because
state.
he's getting, I would suggest, some of the Hispanic vote.
I would agree with that.
So, little Marco, as Mr. Trump called him, is back in the race. He could well be a candidate again for the Republican nomination in 2020. We shall see. Let's just take you to outside the Clinton headquarters here on the west side of New York. Lots of people have been turning up to see it. Most of them, I assume, hoping for a Clinton victory. And there's lots inside the Javits Center. That's our shot there, I think, of the Javits Center, massive convention center here in New York, instantly named after a Republican senator of New York, Senator Javits, who was a pretty moderate Republican. I think, ironically, he probably would have had more in common with Mrs. Clinton than he would have had with Donald Trump. Now, one of the interesting features of this campaign, particularly as it came towards an end, was how nearly all the action was concentrated on the East and the Midwest. In the final 24 hours, they never really went, both candidates, west of the Mississippi. It was all taking place in Florida, the Rust Belt states, North Carolina, Virginia, and so on. But there is a big West out there. A lot of it Republican, but the populated states are really Democrat. And one of the states that has been in contention is Nevada. So let's go to our correspondent there, James Cook. He's in Las Vegas, which I think is Clinton territory. But we don't yet know if the whole state is Clinton territory, do we, James?
Well, yes, I mean, this city is Hillary Clinton territory, but the wider state is extremely interesting, and it feeds into the discussion, Andrew, that you've been having there, because you've been talking about Latino voters, and here in Nevada, with its 6 electoral college votes, not the biggest, but still one of the most important because of the Latino population here, which has made this into a very competitive state. And it's a state which could be very useful for both Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. The Latino population that's eligible to vote here is about 17% of the voting population. The actual Latino population is greater than that. And we've been talking to a lot of people around here, and there was pretty long queues this morning outside some polling stations. About 300 people at one polling place as the doors opened at 7 a.m. They're going to close in, about a couple of hours, just under a couple of hours now here. And Hispanics here were saying that they are very much determined to get out and show Donald Trump that they do not like the way he has been talking about immigrants, and that they are concerned about what he would do if he were to become president. Now, let's be clear that this particular demographic does not by any means vote as a homogenous bloc, but the majority of Latinos are clearly in favor of Hillary Clinton. On the other side, people here out in the western United States, which has a more than a streak of libertarianism through it and more than a streak of individualism, say that they just think Donald Trump would allow them to get on with business and would get America working again. So you hear a lot of that as well. So that there is plenty of support for Mr. Trump here too.
James, thanks for that. James, of course, in Las Vegas, it's Clark County. It's by far the biggest county in Nevada. It has been trending towards Mrs. Clinton throughout this campaign. But there are other parts of Nevada. The desert areas are more Trump. And Reno in the north, Washoe County, that is more Trump. It's really kind of purple at the moment. Remember what Mark Twain said when he went to Reno. He said, "I went to Reno and soon realized this was not a place for a young Presbyterian, so I did not long remain one." That's the kind of effect Reno has on you. Emily, what have you got for us?
Well, I've got a caveat, first of all, because we haven't got a huge percentage of the votes in any of these places, but I want you just to compare what we're getting in some of those key swing states we've been discussing this evening: Florida, Ohio and North Carolina. 53% share of the votes in, and it's absolutely neck and neck. Both candidates on 48% share of the vote. Clinton marginally, if you go to a decimal place, 48.8% to Trump's 48.2%. I can't think that we'll get this one very quickly. Ohio, however, a bit of a different picture. We've only got 12% of the precincts counted, the votes counted, in other words. So there is a long way to go, really 90% still to go. But on this first reading, she takes the lead. She's on 53% to Trump's 44%. In the Rust Belt state that he had the most chance of taking tonight. He spent a lot of time in Ohio. He has appealed directly to those workers worried about the jobs, worried about the economy. He very much hopes to take Ohio, and he still could do at the end of this tally. But as things stand, with those counted, she takes the lead. She also takes the lead here in North Carolina, 52% to his 46%. We've got even fewer votes counted there, just 6%. We don't even show you the numbers, the tallies, until it goes above 5. So we are very conscious that we have a long way to go, particularly with these two races. We also hear that we might not get a full result from North Carolina because there is so much debate at the moment, as you've been discussing, about these opening, closing times of the polling stations there. So we were warned a little over an hour ago that we might not actually hear the result from there, although it could still be projected if there's a big difference.
Well, they didn't know the election was coming.
They forgot, such an easy thing to do.
It came as a surprise.
Even Donald Trump got the date wrong once. So that's 3 of the races we're watching. I'll keep having a look at Virginia for you as well and see how that's shifting depending on the areas that we're getting the precincts in from. But some quite interesting stuff coming to you now with Clinton in the lead.
I'm going to do my duty again, and that's update us quickly on the Senate races.
Yes.
And that is that the Democrats have got a pickup in the Senate. That's Tammy Duckworth. She's a very interesting woman. She served in the Iraq War. She lost both her legs, actually.
Wisconsin.
In Illinois.
Illinois.
And she has beaten Mark Kirk, who was the Republican who she was running against. That's going to be good for Hillary Clinton tonight. If she is doing as well as we think, she's going to be watching the Senate as well closely, isn't she, Ben? Because that's going to change her whole presidency.
That was your number one hit, though, wasn't it?
It's hugely important. Look, this was the state most likely that we would pick up, but Republicans only have 54 seats in the Senate. So if we can take 4 or 5 seats tonight, that's going to be hugely consequential. I think it's going to be much harder to win the House. We'd have to win 30 seats in the House to tip the balance. But if we can get 4 or 5 tonight, in the Senate. That'll be huge. It'll be particularly important for her ability to govern.
So one down, at least 3 to go.
There you go.
There'll be no landslide victory for Democrats in the Senate. Evan Bayh, who was trying to come back to the Senate in Indiana, it's not been called yet, but he's struggling badly there.
I thought he was going to do quite well. That's
he
interesting.
came in and there was an expectation that he was going to do extraordinarily well.
Famous name in Indiana.
He left 6 years ago and basically stayed in Washington, became a lobbyist, had an efficiency apartment in Indiana that he never used.
An efficiency apartment?
Yeah.
What is that one that's got low voltage?
Very tiny apartment, but he didn't stay there.
Look, interesting as Mr. Bayh's living arrangements are, we've got some more results from Emily.
Let's show you the state of the race as things stand. We've had a couple new projections, calls in that South Carolina and Tennessee, both of those southern states then going for Donald Trump. Not a big surprise. They were very much in his tally already, but Tennessee, not impossible to lose. Al Gore lost it as vice president when he then, sorry, not as vice president, but when he ran for president, he lost his home state. But you can see how it's colouring up nicely in red. Many of those states predictable, but still reassuring to Trump that he could still be on track. He's now on 57 Electoral College votes. He is short by 213, trying to get to that magic number of 270. Clinton has got this tally that we talked about before, the Northeast and also Illinois there, Barack Obama's home state. 68, she's short by 202. So at this point in the race, it looks even. But of course, the stuff that's happening below the water, Florida, Virginia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, those are the ones that we'll be watching really tightly, and we won't be getting those for a while.
Okay, it's only 8, so we can carry on watching
this is to
those
get people
for a while.
staying with us. We want you with us right through the night.
Where else are they going to go?
Those are the big ones. They will only stay with us. Let's get a little bit more on Donald Trump and how, of course, his presidency, were he to be elected, would affect not just the United States, but America's allies as well. Andrew earlier was speaking to the former director of the CIA about the position on NATO. Anders Fogh Rasmussen is the former NATO Secretary General. He joins us now from London. Mr. Fogh Rasmussen, you and I have spoken about this before in terms of what Donald Trump has said about NATO. Jim Woolsey was saying, well, it doesn't really matter. He doesn't really mean it. Anyone is ridiculous to seem to be taking it seriously. Are you concerned about what Mr. Trump has said about NATO?
Yeah, absolutely, because he has raised doubt about the American commitment to defending allies, and whether he's elected or not, and I don't think he will be elected president, that has been undermining the credibility of our alliance. So for Europe, it's a good news that Clinton probably will be the United States' next president.
What was it in Mr. Trump's objection to NATO members paying their fair share, which they haven't all been doing, that was objectionable? I mean, he has a point, doesn't he, that America has been carrying the security of Europe for too long, and it's time for European nations to pay up.
Yeah, I fully agree that the Europeans should invest more in defense. We also decided to do that at the NATO summit in Wales in September 2014. All 28 allies signed up to the pledge that within the next decade they will reach the 2% benchmark. And the good news is that in 2016, the Europeans invest much more in defense than they did in 2015. So I'm sure that the Europeans realize that after President Putin's aggression against Ukraine, we're in a quite new security situation, and that calls for more defense investment.
Are you, even if Donald Trump does not win the election tonight, are you concerned about what his nomination for the Republican Party and the amount of support that he has got during this campaign tells you about Europe, about Americans' commitment to involvement in international affairs?
Yeah, absolutely. Because even if he's not elected, he represents an isolationist movement in the United States. But fortunately, Clinton represents another approach. President Clinton would clearly lead. She has said in a speech that the United States can and should lead, and I fully agree with her. We need determined American global leadership, and I'm sure she will represent that.
Okay, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, thank you very much for joining us, the former NATO Secretary General. Ben, is it fair to say that Hillary Clinton is more of a hawk than Barack Obama and would lead America in a more interventionist direction? I'm thinking specifically of an area like Syria, where she has supported a no-fly zone, which your former boss, of course, didn't.
She pressed on Syria. She pressed on the intervention in Libya, which President Obama eventually agreed with. Look, his campaign was premised in 2008 on opposition to the war in Iraq. He thought that longstanding entanglements in the Middle East for the United States was a bad thing. I think even under this administration, Secretary Clinton has learned how difficult the situation in Libya was, for example. So I think she's more cautious than she may used to be. But at the end of the day, I think she has been in favor of intervention more times than President Obama.
She has close relationships with members of the military, with former generals who have been advising her. She supported the surge in Afghanistan. She was a proponent of that as well, of course, in Iraq as well. It does suggest, doesn't it, that the world might have a slightly different relationship with America under President Clinton than it has done under President Obama.
But I also think that she has developed incredibly close relationships with our allies, like the United Kingdom around the world. And she is running in a contest where a President Trump has, in fact, embraced some of our adversaries at the same time as he's alienated many of our allies. So I think that Secretary Clinton will be, or President Clinton, will be very conscientious about those relationships.
But she'll also face a tremendous problem on her left. Let's not forget, she was in a serious primary with Bernie Sanders supporters. She was in a primary where especially millennials were not happy with her hawkish stance. And going into, if she is elected, or for Donald Trump for that matter, this will be the most unfavorable, disliked president this country has ever had. So they won't have a mandate to lead. They're going to be on defense from day one. So she's going to have to worry about hearing it from the right, but also her own left flank. So that's going to be a difficult position for her difficult line for her to walk.
Well, and I think will the Democratic congressional makeup be more to the left after today?
Well, I think you've seen both parties move closer to their base rather than closer to their middle. And you saw that in Bernie Sanders' candidacy and the success of his candidacy. But on the foreign policy front, I think there's been a great war weariness in this country after more than a decade in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So I think that you will see a President Clinton exercise a level of caution in response to that as well.
Mr. Trump was most explicit and even extreme, you could say, on his attitude towards NATO. But the fact is that even a Clinton presidency will not be able to continue to bankroll 70% of the NATO budget and meet the massive naval buildup of Chinese naval power in the Pacific. Something will have to give, whether it's Mr. Trump or Mrs. Clinton. And just tell you, in Florida, 61% of precincts in, and Mr. Trump is 49 to 48, Hillary Clinton. So it's still close, even as the precincts go. Another place where we expect it to be close is Ohio. Let's go back to Barbara in Cleveland. Barbara.
Yeah, well, the polls here, or at least the unofficial tracking, shows quite a close race. We don't know the results yet, but I am in a Democratic stronghold, yet there are still people here who support Mr. Trump. That includes Mr. James Milletti, who is joining me here. He's a seminary student. James, you've been a Republican for a long time.
I
It
have.
must have been a bit lonely to be one here in this county. Do you think that's shifting? I mean, Mr. Trump has thrown things up in the air so much. Maybe he's getting more support here now?
Cleveland had the Republican National Convention, which was great for the state and giving some Republican energy into the area, which it never has. But even the governor, Kasich, wouldn't come to the Republican National Convention, which was incredibly disappointing.
Well, does that worry you that the Republican leadership here in Ohio has pretty much disowned Mr. Trump?
Yeah, it worries me a lot. Kasich claims to be a Christian. If he would just accept Jesus, if everybody would accept Jesus and the sacrifice that he's made and the salvation he offers, that great chasm would be closed, and it would change everything. So I think that would be the most important thing, is to accept.
But why are you supporting Mr. Trump then? If you're such a strong supporter of Jesus, you think he supports Jesus?
You know, Trump may be saved. That's up in the air. A lot of people have said that he is. I'm not sure. But he's certainly raised up by God right now to be God's man for this moment. I have no doubt about that.
Because?
Well, because he's got a great chance to win.
And, you know, a lot of Republicans would see him as not a very convincing Christian or social conservative.
I'm not saying he's necessarily a Christian, but you can still be used by God and not necessarily be a Christian. You can be God's man.
But what would he do then? What would he do?
Well, for instance, he's completely against abortion. He's going to defund Planned Parenthood, which would be great, which is one of the things I care about greatly. Hillary wants to support Planned Parenthood as much as she can, even so much as supporting and voting for partial birth abortion, which is a crime against humanity and a crime against God.
But Mr. Trump has been criticized strongly for his attitudes towards women, his attitudes towards Muslims. You don't see these things as important?
Well, I don't see them as what the media is making out them to be. When Hillary's on stage with Jay-Z, who is one of the worst misogynists of all time,
So
and she's hugging him and supporting him, Trump's
into
potty mouth can't be compared to leaving people to die in Benghazi and to giving our enemies nuclear weapons. Potty mouth is not comparable to that. Not at all.
We are getting into the language of good and evil here, which has characterized some of the differences in this campaign. That was James Milletti talking to me, one of Mr. Trump's supporters in this very Democratic stronghold here in Cleveland.
Just cue me, okay? Let's take a look at what we've got so far. So states that have been projected, just have a look on the map on the floor in front of me. And bear in mind, yes, there's more red, but of course, what Hillary Clinton is deriving her strength from is states just in the belt up at the top northeast part of the USA, where you've got a lot of voters in there. So she's packing in some handy electoral college votes in the New England area. But I'm going to take you down south now, take you to Florida. So let's flash those 29 electoral college votes in Florida. And let's just have a look at what's going on there and what we know from our exit poll. You'll have heard talk about what's coming out of the state, where crucially you can see those parts of the state that have already reported in. They're red, rural areas, Republican areas, obviously, mostly. We're still waiting for places around Miami and Tampa and Orlando and so on. So more Democratic areas yet to report. So maybe that's why it seems very, very tight in the percentages that we've had so far being reported. I'm going to now look at racial profile in Florida. So have a look at the wall here. This is the white proportion of the electorate in Florida, just over half. Black 17%, Hispanics 24%. 1 in 4 now Hispanic, and others 3. Interesting that the white percentage has gone down from about 77, 80% 35 years ago. So that's a real changing state we're seeing here. And if we come this way, we can have a look at exactly what the white vote has done. As far as we can tell from the exit poll, so this is this year's election we're looking at here, it is 62% going for Trump. So Trump has a big advantage among white voters. 34% going for Hillary Clinton. But if I compare it with last time, you'll see actually it's not that much more powerful a vote for Trump in 2016 than it was for Mitt Romney in 2012. And Romney, for the Republicans, lost the state in 2012, and it was Obama who won it. Now, yes, Hillary Clinton is down among whites. That's true. But have a look at this. This is now the Hispanic vote. I said earlier, it's 24% of the electorate. Just come back to this wall. Let's have another look here. 24%, 1 in 4, was about 9% of the state Hispanic in the early 80s. Now it's 24. Let's see this Hispanic vote now, and you can see how powerfully it's going for Hillary Clinton. This is very, very useful for her. 62%. to 33% for the Republican Donald Trump. Now, if you add in other minorities, you think about African-American voters, maybe Asian voters in Florida, you get to a situation where you think actually maybe Hillary Clinton can overwhelm Trump's advantage among whites. The difference on last time is modest. Clinton up just a couple of percentage points on what Barack Obama did last time. And by the way, Trump doing much worse than Romney. But of course, it's crucial to say Obama won the state in 2012, and Clinton, by these figures, may well be on course to doing the same. Back to you, Andrew.
Jeremy, thank you for that. All eyes in Florida at the moment, 68% of precincts in. Mr. Trump is ahead by 1%, 49 to 48. It's a difference of 63,000 odd votes. We're going to keep an eye on this and come back and look and see what's happening with Emily. But for the moment, let's catch up with the news with Clive Myrie.
Andrew, many thanks. The polls have closed in more than half the states across America, and the votes are now being counted, including in several key battleground areas. A high turnout has been reported. Here's Laura Bicker.
Decision Day 2016, and the campaign may have been ugly, but voters turned out in their millions. Around 15% of them told pollsters it was their first time. As dusk fell across the East Coast, the lines were still long. Of course, this is America, so in Colorado, you could even stay in the car and vote. A high turnout could be a good sign for the woman who wishes to be the first female president. Hillary Clinton voted near her home in New York, surrounded by close supporters.
It is the most humbling feeling, Dan, because, I know how much responsibility goes with this, and so many people are counting on the outcome of this election, what it means for our country, and I'll do the very best I can if I'm fortunate enough to win today.
Just a few miles away, her rival also cast his ballot.
It's looking very good.
In Florida, as the votes are counted, there were signs of just how bitter, how divisive this campaign has become. At least one couple are no longer talking to one another. Meanwhile, for the candidates, there is a tense evening ahead. As counting gets underway, they can only watch and wait. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Washington.
In other news, at least one person has been shot dead near a polling station in the state of California, and 3 others have been injured. Witnesses say the attacker, who was heavily armed, opened fire on a group of people in Azusa, 40 kilometers east of Los Angeles. The gunman then barricaded himself into a house, with police urging residents nearby to stay indoors. The British banker Roerik Jutting has been found guilty of murdering 2 Indonesian women in Hong Kong. Their mutilated bodies were found in his apartment in November 2014. In a statement read by his lawyer in court, Jutting expressed remorse for the killings and accepted his actions were horrific. He's been sentenced to life in jail. 5 people suspected of recruiting for so-called Islamic State have been arrested in a series of raids in Germany. They include an Iraqi man known as Abu Wallah, or the preacher without a face. The arrest took place in the north and west of the country. Prince Harry has issued a strongly worded statement criticising the media for their treatment of his girlfriend, the American actress Meghan Markle. He said the media had subjected her to a wave of abuse and harassment, some of which had racial undertones. Here's Nicholas Witchell.
They met in Toronto earlier this year. Rumours of their relationship surfaced a few weeks ago. Some of the stories since have angered Harry. So in what Kensington Palace acknowledges is an unusual step, a statement was issued on Harry's behalf. The past week, it says, has seen a line crossed. His girlfriend, Meghan Markle, has been subject to a wave of abuse and harassment. Some of this has been very public. The smear on the front page of a national newspaper, the racial undertones of comment pieces, and the outright sexism and racism of social media trolls and web article comments. The reference to racial undertones arises because Miss Markle's mother is an African American. Harry evidently now feels duty-bound to try to shield her. The statement says, Prince Harry is worried about Miss Markle's safety and is deeply disappointed that he's not been able to protect her.
There's nothing new about a member of the royal family seeking some privacy or a tabloid media determined to grant as little as possible. This isn't a game, said Harry today. The problem for him is that some editors appear to believe that it is. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News at Buckingham Palace.
That's it. You're up to date. Now, back to Andrew and Catty.
Out here in Times Square, it is just beginning to hot up now as the counting gets more than underway. More results coming in. Mixed picture, many fascinating results still to be determined. But let us give you what we know now. This is the state of the race as we go to our drone shot high over Times Square. There you see Hillary Clinton has 68 Electoral College votes and Donald Trump has 66. Both a long way from the 270 that you need to become the next president of the United States. This is turning out to be an even more interesting, if not exciting night than any of us thought. And before we go back to the presidential election, Catty, more bad news for the Democrats' hope of taking the Senate.
Yeah, so there are sort of 6 or 7 Senate races that we've all been watching very closely, the ones that could swing the Senate from the Republicans to the Democrats. One of those races is in Indiana. It's between the Democrat Evan Bayh, the Republican Todd Young. Bayh was a senator from Indiana before. He had been popular. He jumped into the race in July. It surprised everybody, and he jumped in with a very healthy lead. That lead evaporated, and he looks like, from projections, that Evan Bayh, the Democrat, has lost to Todd Young. He's a 3-term congressman. He's also a former Marine. Todd Young has been an interesting candidate because so many of these Senate and Congress races, they had to think, what do I do if I'm a Republican about Donald Trump? When all of those revelations came out about Donald Trump and his harassment of women and that Access Hollywood tape, you had a slew of Republicans distancing themselves from Donald Trump. He was one of them who threatened to withdraw his support from Donald Trump. They've all been threading the needle on this one. He threatened to withdraw his support from Donald Trump, but Todd Young didn't actually jump and do it. Indiana, we know the state went to Donald Trump for the presidential race. Now it looks like the Republicans have got that Senate seat as well. So from the Senate's point of view, it's looking pretty good at the moment for Republicans. We'll have to see where all those other key races end up, though, Andrew.
Well, they're going to need to win Pennsylvania and Wisconsin for the Senate races to even have a chance of doing that. And every minute that goes by, Florida just becomes more intriguing, Emily.
This is really exciting. Just even as I've refreshed the page, as Catty was speaking, you can see what's happening in Florida now. Trump is leading 49% share of the vote to Clinton's 47.9% share of the vote, more than 1%. This is about 95,000 votes between the two of them. But as things stand, with 70% of the precincts in now, so we are well clear of halfway, he definitely has a lead. And don't forget, this was only won by Obama at the end by 1%. So to have that 1% lead now, well, it could even out and it could be replaced by a Clinton lead. But as things stand, I would have thought his campaign team will be quite excited about the prospect that Florida is still possible as part of his road to victory. Virginia, look at this now. Trump seems to be leading here with 50% share of the vote to Clinton's 45%. Again, 63% share of the votes in. These are all big numbers in terms of the Electoral College, which will make up their eventual tally. So they're watching all these races very closely. Virginia is somewhere where Hillary Clinton would have probably felt quite safe. Obama won it twice. It doesn't mean she can't win this. It could still mean that the ones that haven't been counted yet tend to be in the more urban, more Democrat voting precincts. But as things stand, he is ahead here. Ohio, it's almost the wrong way round. Virginia and Ohio, we might have swapped over at the beginning of the night, thinking that he would be leading in Ohio, she would be leading in Virginia. But as things stand in Ohio, and even fewer of the votes here counted, 20% only, but she has taken the lead. Hillary Clinton on 50% share of the vote to Trump on 46%. Let me just bring you up to date with the map and show you what's actually been called. In the last few minutes, we've had Alabama as well. So when you look at these tallies, everything in blue is Democrat, and don't ignore this swathe of the northeast there that's come in. Everything in red for the Republicans is for Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton on 68, Donald Trump on 66, and they're still going all guns to get to that 270. But it actually feels quite tight now, I think, for the first time in the evening, doesn't it?
They're very tight. And as the Democrats struggle to get control now of the Senate, it's not yet out of their reach, but it's more difficult than it looked only an hour ago. The US networks here, major agencies confirming that the Republicans have kept control of the House of Representatives. Now, that's not a surprise. The Republicans had a big majority there, indeed the biggest majority in the House of Representatives since 1928. And the House of Representatives has never changed hands in a presidential year since 1952, when it changed from Democrat to Republican. And there's a name for that change. It's called the Eisenhower Wave, because that huge change took place as General Eisenhower became President of the United States. So probably a reduced majority, but the Republicans sure now of having at least one of the two legislative arms of this country. There are unconfirmed reports, too, that on a 91% count of the vote in Florida, Mr. Trump is still ahead by 0.8%. There's also reports that working class turnout in Michigan is much higher than expected, and that's good news for Mr. Trump too. Suddenly, this race remains very much a race. Let's go to Trump headquarters to get some reaction to this. Laura Trevelyan, our correspondent, is there. Laura.
Well, Andrew, joining me now is Carl Palladino. He is chair of the New York State Trump campaign. Mr. Palladino, how's the night looking so far to you?
Pretty much as expected so far, but this is the wild time right now. This is the crazy time when all that anxiety is building up, and we really don't have any good numbers yet. When the numbers get into above 70, maybe 80% responding, at that point we'll be able to tell a lot clearer.
But we do have a pretty high percentage of the vote counted in Florida. How are you feeling about Florida? That's key for you, isn't it?
Well, right now we're ahead with over 90% of the vote in, so I would hope that it would hold. Obviously, Florida brings us a lot of anxiety, because to replace Florida, we would need something like New York or something like that to slide over. It's an important state for us. Yeah.
Let's say that you win Florida. That's obviously great for you, 29 votes. How do you get to 270 in the Electoral College from there?
Well, we would need a Michigan, or we would need another blue state to come over to us. And it's my feeling, my personal feeling right now, that given the turnout figures that we heard today, that New York is in play. And it's a possibility. Yeah.
Carl Palladino, chair of the New York State Trump campaign. Thank you for joining us here on BBC News.
Well, thank you.
So that's the view there from inside the Trump campaign. Still early in the night. Back to you, Andrew and Catty.
Thanks, Laura. It is indeed still early in the night, though I guess you could say that the Trump campaign probably a little happier than it would have been just maybe an hour ago, when it looked that it was maybe beginning to slip away from them. Now, for both sides, there is still all to play for. Let's now go to London and to Nigel Farage. When I left London, he was still the interim leader of UKIP. I guess he still is. He's in our Millbank studio there. Nigel Farage, welcome. So, how's your man doing?
He's doing very well. I mean, I think this is a hell of a run for an independent candidate, isn't it? I mean, we hear today that W. Bush didn't vote for him, that John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, voted for Hillary Clinton, so completely deserted by the upper echelons of his own party, without anything like the campaign funds that Hillary had. And here he is, absolutely neck and neck in this race. Fascinating.
So if he's an independent candidate, as you call him, though when I looked at the ballot paper, he seemed to be running as a Republican, maybe an unusual Republican, but a Republican nevertheless. If he wins, would you expect him to govern as what you call an independent?
No, I mean, I think that if he wins tonight, there will be some quite big changes in the Republican Party, because what's clear is the party is doing pretty well in the Senate, it's doing pretty well in the House of Representatives, and yet, you know, he's been stabbed in the back by so many in his own party. So I suspect that if he wins, there'll be quite a bloodletting that goes on within the Republican Party.
Does it not make you nervous that someone that you have become quite close to, I understand, if he was to become president, seems to have very little time for NATO or the defense of Europe at a time when Russia seems more threatening since the days of the Soviet Union?
Well, I think that in general on foreign policy, it's Hillary that's the hawk. I mean, she's the one that supported endless foreign wars, not Trump. On NATO, yes, he's made the point that all the member states need to pull their weight, and they've not been doing so. And I do think that the British relationship with Trump, if he becomes president, to make sure we maintain NATO as a viable force, I think our role in that will be absolutely crucial. And when it comes to Putin, well, look, there are two approaches. I mean, one is to go on provoking him, and indeed, I feel the European Union and America have been doing that over the course of the last few years. The other way is to try and sit down and talk to him. And, you know, George Orr is better than World War.
We have a global audience here tonight on the BBC, but indulge me in our own backyard for a minute, Mr. Farage. In what way would Donald Trump be good for the United Kingdom?
Do you know what? Donald Trump likes the United Kingdom. He believes in the special relationship. As he said himself, we would be at the front of the queue. And to have an American president that respected us, and particularly now that we've become, or we will become, an independent, self-governing country, is a marked difference to the time of President Obama or what Hillary would offer. He likes this country.
And if there is a Trump presidency, have you considered American citizenship and then getting them to appoint you as ambassador to Brussels?
Well, it has been speculated on, it has been joked about. Gosh, if I got a green card and went to Brussels, wouldn't that be fun? I don't really think it's going to happen, though.
No, but you would like it, wouldn't you? You can be honest with us tonight.
All right, yes.
I tell you what, though, he'd have to do an awful lot of fundraising if he was an American ambassador. That's why they appoint them, because they bring the money
They
in.
do,
So,
they bring
Mr.
lots.
Farage, you'd have to be turning out the big bucks.
Well,
Well, he's got big
I tell you
backers,
what,
now-
I'm a pretty good fundraiser.
Yeah, exactly. Nigel Farage, thanks for joining us. Nice to see good old Blighty in the background there. Katy, what do you make of things so far?
Well, it's certainly looking tighter, as you suggest, than it was even half an hour ago. The Clinton campaign is going to be watching Virginia closely. There are mixed reports coming out of Florida about which counties have not yet reported, whether there are any of those big Democratic strongholds in the South. Broward County people are talking about a lot. Has that actually reported yet, or has it not reported yet? Even if it hasn't reported, is it enough to swing back the 125,000 gap that Donald Trump seems to have created in Florida? So let's keep an eye on Florida. Let's keep an eye on Virginia. Actually, let's keep an eye on Moscow too. Why not? Shall we? Shall we go to Russia?
We always like to keep an eye on Moscow.
We've been to London.
That's why we've got NATO.
Let's go to Russia. Donald Trump has something like, by the way, an 82% approval rating in Russia at the moment. The BBC's Steve Rosenberg is there at a watch party in Moscow. God knows what time of the night or the morning it is. Steve, what's the latest from there?
I have to say this is very surreal. I'm in an English pub in Moscow with a group of Russian political activists watching the American presidential election results. And most of the people here, all the people I've spoken to actually, are supporters of Donald Trump. A short while ago they brought in this big portrait of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin and Marine Le Pen, which wasn't exactly Van Gogh, but you get the idea. At the moment, people are following very carefully the Florida voting, and there were some cheers earlier as Trump edged ahead there. Vladimir Putin, a few days ago, said it was utter nonsense to suggest that he favoured Donald Trump in this election. But certainly in recent weeks, state media in Russia has been lavishing praise on the Republican candidate, portraying him as the underdog, portraying him as the crusader against a corrupt Washington elite. And they've been lambasting Hillary Clinton. So I think it's quite clear that for Moscow, it will be better to have a President Trump in the White House than a President Clinton.
Well, Steve, there in that bar, I think that's the busiest bar that we've actually had a chance to look at tonight. Of course, we during the course of this campaign, we sent one of our teams out of reporters, Andrew, on the Trans-Siberian Express from Moscow to Vladivostok. They were all talking about Donald Trump. And as Steve was suggesting there, they loved him. It's one of those countries in the world where opinion of Donald Trump runs very high.
Though we shouldn't forget that their view of Donald Trump is, how shall I put it, filtered through the largely Kremlin-controlled media. So it's not surprising that he's rather popular there. Well, that was Moscow. Let's go to London now. Every American presidential election, the US Embassy in London throws a huge party, and we'd like at this moment to thank the American taxpayers for that. Every 4 years, it's very good of you to do so. Let's go to Richard Lister, our correspondent in the US Embassy in London.
Yeah, you were talking about packed bars. Well, the bar here at the US Embassy has been packed all night. 1,500 people invited, a strictly non-partisan affair. Democrats and Republicans were each given an equal allocation of tickets, so this was all scrupulously by the book. With me is the ambassador, Matthew Buzzon. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
American elections are always a subject of great fascination around the world, but in the diplomatic circles that you move in, have you noticed more interest, dare I say concern about this one?
Well, the circles I try to travel in aren't sort of diplomatic maybe as some of the viewers might think. One of the things I've tried to do, I've been to 155 secondary schools all around the United Kingdom and done a workshop with nearly 20,000 British sixth formers. And I just give them a blank piece of paper and I say, hey, draw what frustrates you or concerns you about America, flip it over and draw or write a word, something that inspires you. And so politics comes up and these young people are paying attention and they have really high standards. I think that's a really good thing. It's not limited to the young people. I hear it from sort of grown-ups like us and older. So yes, they're paying attention and they should. And by the way, we're paying attention in America to what's going on in your country. I think that's very healthy.
Well, as we all pay attention, I mean, should we be concerned that regardless of who wins tonight, America does seem to be moving slightly closer, incrementally, towards a position of more insularity and less engagement with the rest of the world. Should the rest of the world be worried about that?
Well, I think, look, my boss, I can speak to the current administration. I think President Obama, from day one up until the day he leaves, has made the opposite argument. He said to his fellow Americans, if we want to be more peaceful and more prosperous and more just, we've got to engage with the world, not pull back from it, if we want to be more peaceful and more prosperous.
Many Americans don't accept that, do they? If the results that we're seeing come in are anything to go by.
Well, that's right. I mean, we'll see how it plays out tonight. But I think we have a history in our country. I mean, you go back to World War II, 75 years ago today, when you guys were getting bombarded, where were we? If we're honest with ourselves, we were not with you yet, right? So it took us a while, but we got there. And in World War I, same thing, longer time delay, but when we get hands-on and we're helpful, we can do amazing things together. Look what we did together to fight Ebola, right? And we resisted as a country that natural inclination to pull back, which is understandable, but then if we can explain to the American people or the British people that to be engaged will make you safer, will make you more prosperous. That's the argument that our leaders need to make, and each of us as citizens have to make that choice for ourselves.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for joining us. A few more hours to go yet. Lots of people still at this party, watching on the big screen, waiting to see who will be the choice of the American people.
Well, they should pace themselves because it looks like they're going to have to be there for a long time before the result of the presidential election of 2016 is clear. Let's just take a look in at the Clinton headquarters here in New York, over in the Javits Center, that massive conference center in the west side of the city. There you can also see the result, North Carolina, where Mrs. Clinton is 2 points ahead at the moment with not all the votes in by any means. So you see everyone's a little bit subdued now there. They're all looking up, trying to work out what's going on, and they may be like that for a while. No razzmatazz yet on either side. Let's go to the Trump campaign, which isn't that far away. It's about half a dozen blocks towards the east, but still on the west side. Let's see if we can look in on Mr. Trump. And there, too, is the Donald Trump campaign. They've all gathered there. I'm told it's a bit of a zoo outside partly because of the mix of the media. You can't trust the media to behave itself these days. But again, these are pretty subdued as they all wait, both sides waiting, wondering, how is this election going to pan out, waiting for a crucial toss-up swing state to be declared so that they get a sense of which way is going. Now, it is 3 minutes to 9. There's a whole, here in New York, East Coast time, a whole lot more states about to close, Emily.
14 more states close their polls bang on 9 o'clock, and we'll start to get news from these mountain states in the southwest, places like Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona. If Clinton's having a good night, she should take Colorado and New Mexico, as Obama did. If she's having a really great night, she might take Arizona. If those ones start to look dodgy or they don't come in straight away, if there are tight races there, then she's not having such a good night. Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota as well. Trump has gone all out to get Michigan. He thinks that it's going to have the same demographic as Ohio, and he believes he can win Ohio. If he starts to move into that territory, sort of Great Lakes, northern blue territory, then he's having a very good night indeed. So let me just take you to the list, and you can see them all in their glory. We've got 14 more to come in. As ever, the ones that are at the top may take longer. They're expected to be closer races. And then you come down to Texas, Louisiana, South Dakota. We should get a slew of those very quickly on the dot of 9. You were mentioning the key races that we can't take our eyes off here. And this is how Florida, Virginia, Ohio are placed at the moment. 47.8% of the vote to Clinton in Florida, 49.1%. Donald Trump has the lead in Florida, in Virginia, and he's just off in Ohio. We've only got 28% of the precincts in there, but we've got 3/4 of them in here. On those two counts, he's feeling a bit more confident than we were expecting him to at this point in the night, isn't he?
I'm sure he is, Emily. The key so far is that this result still remains entirely uncertain. And of course, financial markets hate uncertainty. They're open in the Far East. Well, let's go to our North American business correspondent on the roof of the BBC studios, Michelle Fleury. Michelle, how are the markets out in the Far East reacting so far?
Well, strangely, even though we're talking about markets in the Far East, one indicator to keep an eye on is the Mexican peso. You may be wondering why the Mexican peso when we're talking about a US election. Well, it all has to do with what Donald Trump has had to say on immigration. Tough talk on immigration, on building a wall, talk about imposing higher trade tariffs. All of this could have a negative effect on America's neighbor, on its economy, Mexico's economy. It's been something we've heard a lot about on the campaign trail. Donald Trump singling out even an American firm, Ford, the American car company, for moving a factory from Michigan to across the border into Mexico, saying he would slap 35% tax on any vehicles coming into the US from Mexico by Ford. That's the kind of talk that has made investors pay close attention to the Mexican peso.
Michelle, thanks for that. We, of course, here talk of nothing else but the Mexican peso.
No.
In fact, we should have bought some. Norm, what happened to all these counties that were swinging to Hillary Clinton?
So a couple of points to make. Clinton's Florida person, Steve Shale, just said a little while ago that she's doing extraordinarily well in Florida in the urban areas, but Trump is doing much better than anybody expected in the ex-urban areas, those places that are not the suburbs but further out. And there'd been an expectation that he would struggle there, and he's not. What we don't know in Florida at this point, with the votes that are out, and the upshot, New York Times, which has done a lot of work on this, earlier projected about an hour ago that they thought Trump might win, but their chief analyst now says, we don't know how many votes are left in South Florida. They think that there are about 729,000 votes that would go to Clinton, largely to Clinton, that would make that up. But this may go on a long time. In Virginia, the big counties that are out are Fairfax and Prince William, which are heavily Democratic. So that one is probably not going to end up in Trump's camp. But he's obviously found some surprising results in places that the early evening didn't suggest.
But Norm, look at the gap in Virginia. I mean, that's a sizable gap that she has to make up. In those counties that you're talking about,
a lot of votes in those counties.
There are a lot of votes.
A lot of votes.
Very well.
It's looking tighter, I'm sure, than anyone in the Clinton camp
It's looking tighter as it goes on, and
tonight.
even in those counties seem to be a slam dunk for Mrs. Clinton. They're being overwhelmed by Trump turnout elsewhere, Emily.
We've got a lot of new states that have been projected in. The polls have shut in these places at 9 o'clock. And look, the whole central part of the USA now, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, except for the 2nd District, which is around the city of Omaha, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. Now, all of those have coloured up for Mr. Trump, for the Republicans, giving him a lead for the first time in about an hour. He's now on 123 Electoral College votes. Hillary Clinton on 97. She's short by 173. He's short by 147. Obviously, these are the ones that we're really looking for, the ones that are at the moment not called. They're too close to call if they're not in yet. New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota. There was a point, and you'll remember this very well, where we even wondered, when it looked as if it was going to be possibly a convincing, emphatic win for Hillary Clinton, that we started wondering whether Texas, that deep red Republican state, could even be in the purple zone, a little bit undecided. But if we just go into it, let's have a look and see. You can probably, haven't got any numbers there yet, but the fact that it has been called so quickly means it was never really in any doubt. If there are Hispanics voting Democrat in Texas, there aren't enough of them yet to actually change the colour of the state, although this may be something that comes through in election cycles to come. But just take you back to the map then, see if anything else has been added in. You can see how it's colouring up in the south, in the central part, and in Wyoming as well, the mountain state here, giving Trump a lead now on 123 to Clinton's 97. Don't jump to any conclusions yet, because there are an awful lot, as we showed you, as I keep going back to, that are very, very close races. Too close to call. We haven't got results from any of the real battlegrounds yet. Not surprising.
We haven't, Emily, but the bottom line of the moment is it's practically a dead heat in Florida, in Ohio, and in North Carolina. It wasn't quite meant to be this way. Are you beginning to feel a little bit nervous for Mrs. Clinton now?
I am feeling incredibly anxious. It is a real nail biter, and in the sense, not only nervous for the prospects of us electing our first female president, but what we see tonight in the states that you just mentioned is going to tell us a lot about the future of the country, the political philosophy of the country, what the electorate expects, and whether or not the country is even more divided than we feel it is, as we've seen during this campaign cycle.
And Ronna, you begin to think that maybe Mr. Trump is doing better than you would have thought?
I think he is doing a lot better than I would have thought. It's so close. The fact that he is, although albeit up by a little bit in Virginia, I never anticipated that. No. I thought that North Carolina would have been one that would have gone for Mrs. Clinton, and it didn't. And that we're neck and neck in Florida. We still have what I believe Broward County, Dade County, and the southern part of Florida to count. But Donald Trump is in a very good spot right now. One I don't think even he would have anticipated being in right now.
Ron, are you, if Donald Trump does as well for the rest of the night and manages to swing those three big ones, do you share any of Michelle's concerns about what this tells us about just how divided America has become? If you're getting a sense of who's voted for him and who has voted for Hillary Clinton?
To be honest with you, Katty, I think we're going to wake up tomorrow and America's going to be as divided and as polarized as we've been in decades, whether it's Hillary Clinton, whether it's Donald Trump. And how do we move on from this? How do we recover as a country to pull ourselves together? We are now alienated by gender, we're alienated by race, we're alienated by age.
And religion.
And religion.
Yes.
How do Americans find unity, regardless of what happens tonight, to say we need to bring ourselves together as a country?
One of the most interesting polls, and actually it was a demographic poll that came out from the Pew Research Center, which is a very respectable, non-partisan research group here in the United States. It came out about a year ago, and in that poll it showed that about a third of Republicans don't just disagree with Democrats' policies, they see them as a threat to the nation. Right. But before Democrats think, oh my God, those Republicans, almost as many Democrats see Republicans as a threat to the nation. That's very different from how it's been in America. Increasingly, Americans live divided lives. These are breaking into tribes. They don't go to the same schools, they don't live in the same areas, they don't parent the same way, they don't read the same media and consume the same media, of course. And I think probably we're seeing those divides in the course of this election tonight.
No question, and this is something that Norm's an expert on, but I think that Washington, D.C., as we've seen it, is broken. Republicans don't talk to Democrats. Democrats don't talk to Republicans. And how can you effectively govern if you're not even sitting down at the table to try to find a way to negotiate? We have to get back to where we were in the first Clinton administration.
But that's not going to get easier. Whoever wins tonight, is it?
Exactly.
No, that's exactly it.
That is the challenge, particularly if the Senate remains in the hands of Republicans. We're going to have a divided House. If we see obstruction again, as we did all throughout President Obama's presidency, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, because let's face it, not all of Donald Trump's policy positions are what Republicans consider to be Republican principles. He is anti-trade, anti-free trade, very isolationist. How will a Republican Congress deal with a President Trump?
Well, the division is so bad now that I see in some polls that if you are a fully paid up Democrat and your kid says that he or she is going to marry a Republican, you're now really upset. And the truth, it seems true the opposite way. Republicans don't want their kids to marry Democrats. And that wasn't true 20, 30 years ago. We haven't even mentioned Pennsylvania yet because there are so many other swing states still in play. We're still trying to discern the outcome. But Pennsylvania could still play a key role in determining the next president of this country. Let's go back to Jeremy Vine.
Good, Andrew. And it's a real honeypot for the Republicans, Pennsylvania. I'll show you the map on the floor, which is the states that we have now projected, so where we think we are so far in the election. And I'll now flash Pennsylvania for you. Last time it went red, by the way, was when George Bush Sr. was elected, that one-term president in 1988. So going back quite a way. Let's just talk a little bit about the state here. And let's look at education in the state and try and break it down. So education in Pennsylvania, we're going back here to the 60s to look at the number of graduates and non-graduates. You can see, by and large in Pennsylvania, nearly everybody was non-graduate, didn't have a degree back in the 60s. And gradually, as you'd expect, with modern America, it changes. Much the same trend in lots of Western democracies. And now you've got a much better educated Pennsylvania corpus here, 72% non-graduates, 28 with degrees. It's not a dramatic thing, but there's clearly an increase there in people with degrees in Pennsylvania. Why is that relevant? It's relevant because we know that non-graduates are much more likely to vote for Donald Trump. And he's once again having to super energize a part of the electorate that is actually falling. Now, if we come to the wall here, we'll just look, we'll break this down, we'll focus in even more. And let's ask for white, college-educated parts of the electorate. Graduates, 44%. So these are white voters with a college education in Pennsylvania. And how are they voting? This is based on the exit polls we got in 2016 in this election. And they're going for Hillary Clinton, but not by a huge margin, 51% to 44%. Let's break it down again. Let's come to the wall and choose a different catchment here. Non-graduates now. Again, whites in Pennsylvania without a degree. Remember, they were in the 90%, now falling, fewer of them. How are they voting? Well, dramatically voting for Trump, according to our exit polls over the last 24 hours. So 62% going for Trump and 34% going for Hillary Clinton. So you were just talking in the panel about divided America. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Once you start to split voters apart, you get some marked differences about their choices in this election. Andrew.
Jeremy, thanks for that. And the interesting thing I would suggest about Pennsylvania is the kind of divisions we've been talking about in the country, they are there in the raw in Pennsylvania itself, aren't they?
Absolutely right. I mean, you've got, obviously you've got Philadelphia, you've got the cities, you've got the Democrats, you've got increasing urbanization, you've got more and more young college graduates. You've also got this hurting part of Pennsylvania, not just the rural areas, but that Rust Belt feel of the parts that are feeling a pain that goes even back beyond the financial crisis of the 2000s. And the map is stark. It's red and it's blue, and you feel as you look at it, never the twain shall meet. And what's really interesting, I think, is that you put into this division all the change we're talking about, and then you have a candidate like Trump who runs to simply maximize the core, doesn't go for the center ground, which is what all politicians do these days. He doesn't do that. And you look at a state like Pennsylvania, and my goodness, where we are at this moment in this election, who knows which way it's going to go?
Jeremy, who knows is the operative question that we're still trying to answer as the results come in. We've got 84% of precincts reporting in Florida, and Mr. Trump still holds on to a very narrow lead. We are still waiting to see these urban counties leaning more to Mrs. Clinton making a difference. But and that may still happen because there are still, 16% of the precincts to come in. But so far, no matter how many come in, Mr. Trump just clings on to that lead. And the amazing thing, too, Catty, is 82% of Virginia precincts in. And he's got a 3-point lead in Virginia. That's remarkable.
That will be making the Clinton camp very nervous. Of course, as Norma said to us all during the course of the evening, we have to know where these votes are coming from. Are there pockets of votes that are still to be counted? But this is looking like a better night for the Trump campaign. We're joined here by Betsy McCaughey. She's an advisor to the Trump campaign. Betsy, I imagine you're feeling happier now than you were an hour ago.
Yes, but I wanted to address the very important question you all raised about divisions in the country, because prosperity can heal many divisions. As Jeremy just noted, the rawness you see is in large measure a feeling people have that Washington has ignored their pain, their economic desperation, their loss of jobs, their loss of hope. And Donald Trump's particular campaign, and the reason that I support it so strongly, is he has delivered an economic program that will revitalize these areas of the country. He believes in really pushing ahead with fossil. Yes, that's right. Fossil fuel production. That's very important to some of the areas you've just cited, natural gas and coal in Pennsylvania, for example. And his corporate tax relief will jumpstart the economy and provide more investment and jobs as a result. So what I'm saying is, don't despair too much. It looks as if all of these divisions are so baked into our nation. But in fact, I believe with a period of real sustained prosperity, a lot of that healing can occur.
But you've had your natural gas revolution and gas prices have collapsed already.
Well,
you are under international obligations now on CO2 emissions, so that will limit.
Those are not binding.
Is he going to break them? Is he going to break them?
I hope that the next president will break them.
And you think that will bring the nation together?
Yes, I do, because let me point out,
deeply divided?
I used to be lieutenant governor of New York, and the southern tier of New York is in agonizing poverty because we are not producing natural gas there. We are not fracking there. And Donald Trump has said, let's max out our energy production at home. It will provide so many jobs for people.
Ben, this is the argument that Betsy is making is clearly the economic argument that is doing so well for Mr. Trump in these areas that you're pointing out of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida,
West Virginia, and parts of Virginia.
Virginia itself.
Oh, yes.
Why has Hillary Clinton failed to make the case that she will be better for the American economy? And she polls on that too, that she will be better, less good for the American economy. Why hasn't she made that case?
Well, I think there's a split in perceptions in the country. I mean, we've seen under President Obama 73 straight months of private sector job growth. We've seen wages pick up just over the past month. So many Americans are starting to feel the dividends of the economic recovery. But there are communities in America where the core industry has left some Americans behind. And whether we have a President Clinton or President Trump, reaching those communities with a jobs program is critically important. But a President Trump hasn't proposed a sound economic program. He's proposed tax breaks for the wealthiest that drove us into the financial crisis in the first place. We pursued an all of the above energy strategy under this administration. And those jobs have not come back to certain communities. So the notion that he's proposed a detailed economic plan is simply a lie.
It's very detailed, and let me point out that the most important part of it is slashing business taxes from between 35 and 39% nominal rate to 15%. Any business of any size will not pay more than 15% tax on its income. And that is so important because businesses in this country are at a tremendous disadvantage when you see England, Canada, Ireland and so many other countries slashing their business
But
taxes.
it is also the case that he's proposed reducing the top tax rate in America from 39.6% down to 33%,
that is true.
which would be a big windfall for
That's
the wealthiest
right.
in the country.
Well, windfall, but those are the people who do the investing. But the real key is cutting the business taxes because, and also the individual taxes, because don't forget, many of the small businesses in this country file as individuals, not as corporations.
Donald Trump would pull back from our economic alliances all around the world. I mean, anytime it looked like Donald Trump might get close to the presidency, the stock market has tanked. I think that's a sign.
OK, we'll not totally refight the campaign, though I must say, as an observer of such matters, it's quite interesting to finally have a debate about policy.
Isn't it great?
In this presidential campaign.